Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. WeatherBrains episode 800. Who'd have thunk it? We started this thing way back in 2006. But here we are in 2021. This is the pre-show. This is for May the 17th, 2021, the magical time of this program where we do three things. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and we say very outrageous things occasionally. Thank you for being here. Let's get the embed code going. Let's get the guest on here, and let's rock show number 800. A lot of weather weenies are busy watching the convection out in West Texas tonight. Some very photogenic LP supercell thunderstorms out there tonight and last night as well. And for those of us down here in the Deep South, we are so excited that the action has finally shifted. We've had enough. We have the Death Ridge settling in, which means you can stick a fork in our tornado season for Alabama and Mississippi and Tennessee and Georgia. Now we can move on to the hurricane season, which begins shortly. Still begins June 1st in the Atlantic Basin. I know the Hurricane Center is issuing the outlooks already. They started on May 15th, a couple of days ago, but the season technically begins on the 1st of June. So let's see if we can find anybody that wants to join us for number 800 tonight. I have a funny feeling we might just have a full house. Know that Nate might be a little late. And let's see who else we got to get on here. I think that's everybody. Who are we missing here? It's pretty sad when you've been doing this show for 15 years and you can't remember all of the regulars that should be on your email list for the invitation. I think we've got everybody. So let's hit the button here. Let's make this thing happen. All right. Hope you're having a good week, good Monday. Yeah, we've got the Death Ridge settling in here, which means that we're going to be heating up, drying out, calming down. Been a pretty rough ride for the southern United States. March and April and 1st of May had a pretty good event the first week of May with flooding and tornadoes. But again, Oklahoma, Texas, you can have it. So number 800. For those that don't know, if you're stumbling onto this for the first time, most people listen. This is the video version. And if you're looking for the actual show content, move the slider over about 5 minutes and you'll hit it there. Or you can listen to our podcast version, the audio version. About 3 out of 4 people that consume this, they listen instead of watching. Oh, Bill's in a Roach Motel tonight. Yes.
It's America's favorite game show. Guess what motel chain Bill is staying at tonight?
Trying to determine from those the lighting fixtures back there. Those are very fancy, upscale looking.
That's actually the opposite of that. That's good that they pulled that off while they were actually doing the opposite.
Okay.
I don't know if that tells you anything. This can give you a clue as to my location, maybe, but it may take Nate to decipher it.
B&G lemon pie.
Yeah. And
I never had
be like JB, and I could show you what I have for dinner tonight. If you want.
I have never had a B&G lemon pie.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I'd never heard of it either, but it must be.
So if Nate would know where you are, you must be in the eastern U.S. somewhere.
Very good. Very good. You're getting closer, warmer.
So Virginia, North Carolina.
North Carolina. Very good, James.
Charlotte.
Well, when you think of barbecue in North Carolina, what town comes to mind?
I don't know.
I think it's Lexington. Nate was always telling me was so good. And I'm just driving on the interstate today, driving along, and it's like Lexington. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I just go across like 3 lanes at about 80 miles an hour and right off the exit. And I'm like, where's the barbecue? So I had a big, nice barbecue plate for dinner, and Nate gets on here a little bit later. I know he's going to be late, but we'll have to see if I did good or not. I know the parking lot sure was full, and it was a big place.
Johnny Parker just tweeted, already got a show title for episode 1000. How are we still doing this?
Hey, that's true. How will that be 4 years from now? It'll be a retirement age, James.
Yeah, I'll be in the, old folks home.
Shady Acres nursing home.
Exactly. Shady Acres, playing shuffleboard and attending the prune pageant.
If our guests can't get through, we might get to have the whole show talking about all the first 800.
I don't know if I have the energy for that, Bill.
Well, I think you could probably give it a good shot, Jeremy.
I could give it a shot. Good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing?
Great. It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
We spoke too soon about the guests being able to get on easily under the new regime here, Jeremy.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we hear somebody. Is that Aaron or John?
Yeah, that's Aaron, but I am. Let me switch my camera here. Okay.
Yeah,
I can see you now.
There we go. Hey, Aaron.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now,
Yeah.
Mr. Verizon.
Loud and clear.
John is here too, but I am not getting the video to work here.
I had to switch it under the, I guess, the web client's little arrow there for video.
But we can hear you, John. So if we get at least that much, we'll be in great shape.
All right. Well, let me see if I'll work on this here.
Aaron will have to share his screen when it comes time to show some graphics, because tonight there's some graphics.
I'm just glad. I was actually first concerned that using the web client, I wasn't going to be able to share the screen, but looks like I can. So keep my fingers crossed that the web client.
You're coming through loud and clear there, Aaron, and video looks great.
Good.
So let me enable screen sharing for everybody.
Oh, look at who Aubrey has with her.
I decided I needed my bear tonight.
Bear.
Is it Bring Bear to Work night?
It was Bring Bear to Work night.
Oh,
Say hi.
sweet baby.
That didn't have anything to do with the University of Alabama that you named Bear for, is it, Aubrey?
No.
No.
Nope. It was for the
Good
Shenandoah
shot.
National Park black bears.
There you go.
Oh, sweet face. Oh, I love babies. Cute. All right,
My high school,
we got a
make
full
an
house.
appearance and we're good.
my high school was the Black Bears.
Ooh.
wow.
So let's see. Nate is coming late. Kim typically will be here a few minutes late. I think we're all here, so let's get this thing going.
First class has checked in full again.
Yeah, exactly. All of the passengers have boarded, and here we go. Same sponsor intro, correct, Bill?
Yes, no change through the end of June.
All right, and here we go. Who's making that racket? Hey!
That would be
There we go. It was John. I'm going to mute you for a second, John. Here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
WeatherBrains is brought to you by Midland Weather Radio. Every home, school, and business should have a NOAA Weather Radio, the official voice of the National Weather Service. And the AMS Weather Band.
Join the American Meteorological Society by becoming a member of the band. The AMS Weather Band is a global community of weather enthusiasts dedicated to learning and sharing their love of science. Visit amsweatherband.org to learn more and join the band today.
WeatherBrains episode number 800. On the nose. Here we are. We made it this far. This is for Monday, May 17th, 2021. This is the weekly show that is all about weather. I imagine all the weather weenies of the world are watching the thunderstorms out in West Texas tonight. Looks like Lubbock is under a tornado warning. They are in the Polygon as we speak. Troy, that's your domain out there. Looks pretty busy again, huh?
Yeah, got the tornado warnings. I understand out in the Lubbock area. I haven't been watching them all that closely. We had a round of thunderstorms here about midday today, 1 o'clock, but they came through pretty behaved, I think, with only about maybe a quarter to half inch of rainfall, which is the first part of what they say is 5 to 10 inches of rain for Austin
Ooh.
between now and next Friday. So we're into what I think is going to be a very serious flood event. Especially from here to Dallas, over to Tyler, down to Houston, back to San Antonio, Austin, back to Dallas, sort of in that triangle there. So big event, and but it's actually very pleasant out there now. The sun's out, the clouds broke after the midday thunderstorms, but I have a feeling this may be the sucker hole in the middle of everything. So we'll see.
It looks like Lake Charles had some really serious flooding today. Had over a foot. Troy, is that how much they had?
You know, I haven't been watching Lake Charles that much, but it wouldn't surprise me. I know they had some very heavy rain, and there were some operational issues, I think, at the Weather Service there earlier today too, that may have been related to that weather. But no, Brownsville or someone was backing them up for a little bit today, at least partially. But it wouldn't surprise me. Nothing will surprise me with the years of 2020 and 2021.
Right. Aubrey, you have a guest. Why don't you introduce your guest,
I
please?
do have a little guest. This is Little Bear. Bear,
Hey,
say
Bear.
Hi. Hi. Kind of a WeatherBrains mascot. It's been a while since I've had her on WeatherBrains now that my schedule has changed and everything. So I just went home for dinner break tonight, which I don't usually do. And I said, you know what? I need my bear tonight. So I decided to bring her in, and
Oh, she's so cute.
Now,
thought you might
Bear,
enjoy it.
Hey, Bear.
run over
Hey, Bear.
on the air and jump on television with you?
So she usually sits at my feet when I'm on the wall. So if she gets really needy, she'll kind of stand up on her hind legs, but usually she just sits at my feet, and by 10 and 11, she's out. She's falling asleep. She sits in the little chair next to me. That's it.
That is
Okay.
awesome. Cute.
Not affected by all this fame and popularity.
No. I mean, she has her own segment. She has her own segment on Thursday. She has her own commercial. So she's more popular than James Spann sometimes.
That's not saying much.
Way to go,
That's
Bear.
not saying much. And see, Bear has no haters. That's the one thing we know about Bear. No haters at all.
Yeah,
Boy,
that's
that's
right.
Plenty
true.
of haters. Kim, you got this weather in Oklahoma? What's your situation up there? Texas is rocking and rolling tonight.
Yeah, no kidding. We are better off than Texas. It's been rainy, but you know, until we need to start building our ark, which might happen over the next couple days, then we'll start complaining. So far it's manageable. Yeah, Texas is a mess, and pretty grateful to be. I feel like week after week I'm giving we're not in a disaster right now report here in Central Oklahoma. So we just got our roof insurance claim process today and everything. So again, I'm good. We don't need to have any more of that. We're sitting all right here in Oklahoma.
Okay, that's good. We're going to make it through this. Now, Jen, you're under the death ridge, aren't you? You're kind of getting in the same pattern we're in here, right?
Yeah, little rain today, but then the ridge builds in and we get really warm here, which I am not going to complain. We're finally going in the right direction, and we start getting dry about Wednesday, and I really don't see a lot of rain here even through the weekend. So we're going to go the other way, and everything's going to stay to our west. So I'm going to find myself outdoors a little bit. Yes, it's all going to go to Kim and Troy. So
Yep.
all good here in Ohio.
Yeah, the whole eastern third of the country is kind of getting under the ridge, so all the action is shifting back off to the west. Looks like Bill Murray's got a smoke in his room there. But Bill,
No, I was going to say.
are you token on? It looks like Bill's token on a number and digging on the radio.
That's awesome.
Celebrating
Wow.
800.
Hey,
Bill,
man.
it's okay, buddy. It's okay.
Who was the famous actress they used to put Vaseline on the camera to make her look more luminous in the 40s and 50s? But that's not what's happening, because I checked that. There is no smoke in this room, at least that I know of. It looks like a hazy July day in Alabama.
So you're not smoking weed, are you, Bill?
No. It's not legal. It's not legal here in this state. Now, how's that? See, if I turn off that little light
Yeah.
right there,
Oh yeah, much
A
better.
little bit better.
That'll
now
work.
my,
All right.
now
Well,
my screen is going dark, and I can't read my notes. Back to
Oh.
Smokey. Sorry about that.
Okay.
all right.
Yeah,
Well,
well,
bring in our guests before they bail on us.
Yeah, James. Tonight, our guest panelist is a friend of the podcast. He appeared on show 671, which was called Facebook Brains. I bet that probably made the honorable mentions for tonight. But he's the owner of JRB Storm Photography. Jeremy Bauer, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Bill, and good to see everyone tonight on episode 800. And I have just one question. Aren't you guys kind of like a glutton for punishment? I mean, this is my 4th appearance. Had you had enough for the previous 3?
Well, we count you like as the Alec Baldwin of WeatherBrains.
That would be an
Showtime.
upgrade. That would be an upgrade. But no, good to see everyone tonight. And later on this evening, I'm going to give you the top 10 countdown of the episodes of the YouTube era. So stay tuned. It's going to be a memorable moment.
It really is outstanding. So thank you for doing that, Jeremy, because we're like, we like didn't bring any presents to our own party tonight. So we thank you for taking care of that for us. But we really have a great show tonight, one we've been really excited about, looking forward to for a long time. We've got 2 Sues with us tonight. The Sue at North Platte, John Stopcott. I hope I said that right, John. As many times as we talked, I never made sure I checked your pronunciation. Was I even close? No, we can't hear him. Aaron.
And he might be.
Yeah, that is correct. That's how you pronounce his last name.
That's pretty good,
Stopcott.
Kim. That's Stopcott. Okay, see, I didn't get it right. I never get it right, John. So I should have checked that. But when we were doing our tests, but we're awfully glad to have you here tonight. And the Sue at Dodge City, Kansas, Aaron Johnson joins us also. Aaron,
It's actually Johansson. I'm just teasing.
Oh my goodness, it's Scarlett's brother. You know, so. But we're glad you're here too. So no, I never get those right. So anyway, but we're really thrilled to be talking about this tonight. First, let's get a little bit of your backgrounds. You guys met at one of the Weather Service offices, right?
Yeah, I've kind of been making a tour of the Central Great Plains for years, but I first got to know John actually before I even worked at the same office as him. Oh, geez, about 20 years ago. But we have a regional High Plains AMS NWA chapter out here that is a collective of the North Platte, Nebraska, Hastings, Nebraska, Goodland, Kansas, and Dodge City, Kansas. And so kind of got to know John a little bit there, but then he and his cohorts were crazy enough to actually take me as one of the forecasters there. And so got to work with John for a few years, and then moved on up the ladder and around the circle, and ended up being a Sioux in the same general area as John. So been working with him pretty closely here in the last 6 years, especially involving this regional TWIP program, Tornado Warning Improvement Project. And so, but I've, my background goes back to working in the private sector, both TV and just for, worked for a gentleman in Wichita, you may have remembered, Weather Data back in the day.
Yeah.
So
love my weather data. I used to have a telex machine that I pulled my weather data in on back when there were 300 baud modems, James Spann.
There you go. But so yeah, been in this business for a few decades, and it's a pleasure to get to talk to you guys tonight.
It's our pleasure, and we're glad you're here. And John, you kind of have done it the other way. If Aaron's hopped around, been a lot of places, you've stayed in one place for a while. No, John?
Uh-oh.
He was so offended by how you pronounced his name that he just bailed.
He's out.
Him. I would have already been gone too. Yeah.
I'll be flying solo here.
His name just reappeared, and now he's muted, so maybe he can unmute. We just knew this was going to work perfectly tonight. I bragged on it so big time during the test, and that was a mistake. But John has been there he's been at his office for a long, long time, hasn't he, Aaron?
Yeah, John, honestly, the exact date he got to North Platte, I couldn't give you, but he's been there for over 20 years, and briefly spent some time also at the Hastings Grand Island office in the 90s. And so he's a Nebraska guy, but he's been pretty much there at North Platte for a while, and been a good Sioux for not only that office, but for the Weather Service and the specific region we work in. So.
And now he's cloned himself. So let's see if the second John can hear us, or we can hear him. Darn, we'll work on that. So Jeremy, you're a Nebraska guy too, right?
Yes, I am.
A Cornhusker at heart. And that picture behind you is kind of famous. You took that picture, didn't you?
Yeah, that was out near Elm Creek, so that's out kind of towards the Lexington area, out towards the center part of the state, back on July 7th of 2014.
Wow, that is outstanding. That is beautiful. So we'll hear.
For the people viewing here, I'll duck and cover here.
Yeah,
Man,
I have a print of that you gave us as a gift, and I really appreciate that. All right, so Aaron, we got to get into this to the TWIP a little bit here. Talk about how that. First, I guess, tell us what it is, and then let's talk about how it came about.
Sure. So this was a Weather Service, specifically Central Region of the National Weather Service, created team. And it actually had kind of its origination out of a team that was more concerned with consistency, especially with how we would brief partners, how the forecast would look. But there was a concern, and rightfully so, that in this case specifically, the tornado warning decision process was a bit all over the place, and especially when you look at the long-standing, false alarm rates, for example. Really, since the advent of the 88D network, it really hasn't changed much. We've stayed pretty consistent in that 70-75% false alarm rate, and detections have increased occasionally. But there was concern, though, that you would have some folks at an office that, for whatever they were doing, able to improve upon that. Others were falling well short. So even just within the office, there was a lot of inconsistency. So out of that came this idea to try to bring up, the overall decision-making process, so there was some consistency. The end game, obviously, to improve decision-making. We don't want to make it consistently bad, but we wanted to improve that. And so, the team was formed, or at least thought about, in late 2015. And then usual call for folks that were interested in nominations. And of course, I put my name out there, so did John. And so we got notified in early 2016. And so the Central Region Science and Technology Integration Unit's the one that kind of fed this group along. And, originally our concept was only about a 3-year run to kind of create some training, spin this stuff up, deliver it, and then spin down within 3 years. But boy, when we got into this, the gaping holes that we found within not only just the consistency with warnings and the decisions that we were making, but overall the training in combination with what's out there for research, there was a pretty big gap. The training divisions in the Weather Service are really good at bringing in the new hires and bringing them up to a pretty decent level. But by the time they're done with that group, the next crop comes in. And so in the meantime, you have a lot of this cutting edge research from whether it's places like OU, Penn State, so on and so forth, Texas Tech, that are putting out stuff. And especially in the last 15 years, the ability to take, storms that were maybe completely sampled by Dows, stick nets, et cetera, take that data and put it into a high resolution model and simulate it. And I'm sure you've seen stuff such as what Lee Orff has done to be able to take that and start to actually resolve features that maybe we saw on the 88D, but we couldn't really understand what was going on. So it was largely ignored. To be able to take that and say, okay, our training divisions are really good at bringing people up to this part, and we need to continue that. But we needed something else to fill that gap, to get those people that were doing this on their own, that were going and reading the research, that were applying the principles, to get everybody else as close as we could up to that part. Now, truth be told, you're never going to have, everybody on the same level. I mean, people's passions are going to be different and so on and so forth. But the end game, though, was to be able to bridge that gap in the understanding. And that really goes across multiple tornado types. John and I are most notable for the supercell based tornado genesis work, but QLCS, mesovortices, that's a big area. I've also worked on land spouts, being able to just help the decision-making process. And sometimes it's knowing when not to warn is the best choice, and letting people know that it's okay. There are times where, especially with land spouts, you're not going to know about it until it's largely over. And so rather than playing whack-a-mole, how can we message that potential? And so little things like that is kind of where this team started and what its goal was. But it's really, I mean, we started off with 7 people on the team, and we've had some people ebb and flow out of the team like you would expect with anything. But I think that we were surprised at how big the gap was and how much work we had ahead of us, that this, 2 years to get the training provided, and by 3 years it's done, it's over. I think we're all a little maybe delusional in thinking that's all that needed to be done, because as we've dug into more and more of this, we found, boy, there's this area over here we need to look at too to improve, especially the tornado warning decision making. But we've gotten requests into other areas of severe convection. It's not really in our realm of responsibility, but you're talking wind and hail events. There's some choices there that can be improved within the overall decision-making process. But that's kind of the quick background on this team and what it was formed for. And so we're composed of mostly SUs and some forecasters, but it's specifically across the Weather Service Central region. With that being stated, we interact and coordinate with other regions. There's a group, SU group down in basically the southeast, south central U.S. that we coordinate with, like Kevin Laws in Birmingham, Chad Entremont in Jackson, Mississippi. So, and we do interact obviously with the training divisions themselves. They will incorporate some of our stuff, other stuff it's standalone. And so that's kind of a general outline of what we are and where we're kind of going.
Aaron, Troy here. My question, you kind of answered it toward the end, but thank you for what you and John are doing and your group is doing. I'll tell you that right off the bat, because I think we need to seriously look at that. I'm encouraged hearing that our friends down at the office in Birmingham, because we know they sat back and looked at their warnings and the warning process. I guess my question is, well, actually I have a couple of them. My initial question was, have people from other regions reached out to you to find out what you're able to tell? Here's one for you, which I'm not sure maybe necessarily, Aaron, you want to answer. Of course, no one's watching, so it's no big deal between you and me. But is the false alarm ratio the holy grail is it what is it? I mean, are we finding out that number, is it all that important these days?
So, I'll kind of answer the first one, and kind of mentioned this before. We have, bridged that gap with a lot of the other regions and even some of the media. We, for example, the Denver media market was very interested in our land spout material for obvious reasons. They get a fair number of land spouts out by DIA in the Denver cyclone area. So we have worked with them. Some of the research partners, we've got our subject matter experts that we interact with and try to bring along, especially things that we think could be put into algorithms. But, the training divisions, again, that's something we're interacting with them as much as we can and the other regions. Now, in terms of the metrics, they call them the Gipper goals in the Weather Service. And, I'll admit, when you look at the actual, I'll see where I'm going to quote this here, the actual charter for the TWIP. I actually found this thing today. Figured I'd make sure I was remembering history correct. Specifically mentioned probability detection and false alarm. So it's, to some degree, it's kind of always a fallback for what we look at in terms of the performance. But is it really the true measure of how we're doing? That's probably an open-ended question that I don't really know. I would say that there are direct connections with things like false alarms that we can improve on. But listen, the science is never going to be perfect, at least in any of our lifetimes. The equipment we use is never going to be perfect. So we're never going to get to the point, and this may be hard for some to hear, but we're never going to get to 0 false alarms and 100% detection. There's always going to be something that falls outside of that distribution of events that we're very comfortable, because we always see things that way. But, you know, on the other side of this, though, with the metrics, where have we been since the 88D? Well, we got very, very comfortable with using rotational velocity as our key indicator for tornado prediction. And that's fine. We need to be able to say, yes, there's a mesocyclone here, or there's a QLCS mesovortex. Or in the case of a landspout, we see nothing, except clear air, and then it's too late. But what we found, and a lot of this has taken years of research and collecting enough data, is that, you know, first and foremost, like in supercells, the mesocyclone may be important. It's extremely important for dynamic lift, but in terms of consistency of giving us the all-important lead time, which I think is probably more important than even false alarms, it's a very diagnostic way to measure a storm's tornado potential. It's not really prognostic. And so we got these fields that are available in dual pol that help us, that anticipate what's happening. And so if we start to apply these new, more cutting edge techniques, they will inevitably help, I think, improve some of those metrics, because we're going to no longer be waiting until, oops, there's a strong mesocyclone and couple it. You know, sometimes you see that ahead of time. Other times I can show you a ton of cases where there was absolutely no signal until the tornado was ongoing. And so a lot of that, you know, I'm getting probably long-winded on this answer, but my friends will tell you I love to talk. The ability to apply this new technology and the new concepts, you know, dual pol. A lot of folks still don't even really want to use dual pol, except for finding a tornado, you know, a TDS. They think that, well, that's what it's primarily for. Well, there's other tools that anticipate, you know, what's going to happen, not only the mesocyclone, but what's going on below that. And so ultimately, if you use these other techniques and these other processes, that will help those metrics. But I'd be lying if I say that the metrics are a perfect way to measure how we're performing, because they're not. There's always going to be limitations. You know, out here where John and I work in the high plains, you may have, unless there's, you know, a chaser convergence, you may have a 30-second tornado that never gets reported.
Yeah.
And so versus, you know, you get farther east where you may have at least some forested areas where you can at least knock down a few branches. Out here, unless it hits a stop sign, we're kind of out of luck in some cases. So, you know, those metrics, there's always going to be biases in them. So it's not a perfect way to do it, but those are the rules we kind of have to work by, especially in the Weather Service. So we use these other things to help improve that, but that's not our main goal.
Aaron, anyone that's watched here knows that I complain in a very basic sense that I think there are too many warnings. Is it safe to assume that maybe the reason the Central Region looked at this was that maybe we needed to be more selective in our warnings, or is that an unfair judgment to be able to make? I mean, I could make it, but that doesn't mean anything. I'm interested in seeing, you know, what caused this group to get together in 2015.
Yeah, probably the biggest gain that can be made in the near term is knowing when not to warn. We, as a whole, across the entire weather enterprise, we probably identify storms as being tornadic that really are not. I mean, even when you look at outbreaks like in 2011, it's not like those storms spent every second of their lifespan producing a tornado. Even the ones that produce long track tornadoes, you'll find still spent an enormous amount of time non-tornadic. And then you combine it with days where you may have 5 storms and one of those produces a tornado for 5 minutes. So that entire rest of the period, you know, for carpet bombing tornado warnings, you know, who are we serving? And so
right.
That's actually one of the big things that this team, especially on the supercell side, was to say, okay, we need to stop just, oh, there's a mesocyclone, that equals tornado. Yeah. Well, there's too many there. And you could do the same thing with landspouts. Matter of fact, if you look at my office this evening, we had some landspouts farther west, and we went a different messaging route than a tornado warning.
Yeah. Well, you know, Aaron, that the one thing that I think is interesting is, mesocyclones, yeah, it's great to be able to look at, see the velocity, see things that are going on, but how many times do mesocyclones produce tornadoes? We know that number is less than 20% when
Right.
it comes down to it. So you've got to be careful going that route or you're going to be overwarning. And so I appreciate you saying that, because the Weather Service, men and women of the Weather Service do an amazing job. I'll tell you that as someone who watches everything they do right now in Lubbock, the hard work they're doing in Lubbock tonight. But I just worry that we overwarn maybe a little bit, and it reduces it's sort of the cry, kind of cry wolf syndrome in a sense.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's always going to be a challenge there. Even if we drop the false alarms by 30-40%, you're going to have some folks that it's not necessarily a warning, no warning. It's a spatial false alarm. And so, until we get to the day, and we'll all be long gone, where you have a warning or a probability plume that's, 50 yards wide or 300 yards wide or a mile wide, and there's nothing either side of it. And, whoever's out there taking pictures a half mile away, I'm under a severe thunderstorm warning, but they're under. Till we get to that day, it's probably always going to be a losing battle to some degree. But overall, I'm not saying anything that isn't there within even the stats. We obviously produce too many tornado warnings. Can we improve upon that? I think we can. Can we make it perfect? Not anytime soon. And so, and listen, there's going to be times that the concepts that John and I have developed for supercells, there's going to be limitations to what the radar can sample. I mean, if you're looking at something at 90 nautical miles away, listen, there's nothing low level about a storm at that range. There's nothing. And so half of these things that we're bringing up, folks, have a range limit of about 65, 70 nautical miles, maybe a little more if for the sites that are shooting a little lower, below half degree now, which kind of wish our site did. We have some zones 100 nautical miles out, but I guess that's my plug for those that could help me out there. But, it's knowing when not to warn is, I think, extremely critical, or knowing when the messaging needs to change. We've got the ability to issue severes with tornado possible, for example, and maybe that's not ideal, but that gives you a situation in a very low probability chance of a tornado occurring, of not just carpet bombing tornado warnings. Hate to say there's acceptable misses, but there are acceptable misses in this business because it's not an exact science.
Thank you, sir.
Troy's line of questioning is perfect, in line with where I'm interested in going. And thank you, Aaron, for your great description. You can tell, by the way, that you're so accustomed to educating people. You're really great at taking these complex concepts and conveying them in a way that makes sense. And I'm curious to know how much you can describe how your program maybe dovetails with another that I've learned about that exists within the Weather Service, called the Mesoanalysis Boot Camp. So you've mentioned here tonight that, we can't just rely on radar data. That's pretty much nowcasting. That's barely forecasting. But it's so difficult, I think, when the radar technologies are getting better, it almost draws you in more. And this is a concern that I have and others share when we're going to have, more rapid scanning capabilities with things like PAR and MPAR, and you'll be able to isolate just a very specific set, of the sector that you want to look at, and perhaps it'll be a minute or less frequency. And if you get down that pathway, you're really honing in on the now. So what you need to think about is being able to zoom out to the environment. And I'm wondering if you can comment on, maybe this is something that you teach in your instruction materials. Talk a little bit about that parallel effort that is going on in the Weather Service. Sure. And how you've incorporated mesoscale analysis.
Sure. So when you're talking about severe convection, those two are interconnected in so many ways. There's not really an easy way to break them apart. You're going to have stuff on mesobeta scales that's going to help drive that ship. I mean, if a storm is moving over, a stable layer, it doesn't matter if it's got a mesocyclone. So you've got to be able to understand, okay, this storm's elevated, or this storm's heading into a region of increased shear, or I can see rapid development on this flanking line. Something else is going to happen. And so the mesoanalysis has been definitely highlighted and emphasized in the last few years within the Weather Service. There's an entire, they call it the mesoscale environmental analysis training that it's been partitioned out in big chunks or small chunks, but forecasters are supposed to be going through this to help them not only with messaging to partners, but also to be able to convey these things that do impact the storm scale. Now, that stated, you can have two storms look identical, traversing the same mesoscale environment. One will and one won't do whatever it may be. So the storm scale still is largely driving the ship. But to say that the mesoanalysis has no impact that'd be wrong. And so the goal has been to try to refocus people's efforts maybe away from doing gridded analysis within our AWIPs constantly, to where, while that's still important and critical, let's focus in on what we're seeing with, especially, hey, you mentioned we got rapid scan data off the satellite data. Let's look at that. Let's be able to see these features. Let's be able to anticipate, using especially the array of RGBs, but using things that whether it's even the SPC mesoanalysis, using all these different features to be able to help and feed information should ultimately improve the decision making on the warning side. So we're not directly connected to the mesoanalysis proving ground stuff, although I will admit I'm in a virtual test bed the next couple of days, so I guess I'm kind of part of it. But the TWIP really isn't. With that stated, if you look at a lot of our training material, we frequently mention various mesoscale analysis, whether it's parameters, whether it's looking for features. So those, we've made sure that people understand that they're connected. Even on the supercell side, for example, we've got, when you look at what's called a ZDR arc, and then there's this KDP foot that we use for separation vector. The utility of the separation vector isn't necessarily as important in high shear environments. So for example, the event back in late March that many of you went through, that was a little bit higher low shear environment. So the mere existence of a ZD arc was sufficient to say this is going to be what is going to help anticipate the level meso intensifying, versus in a weaker shear environment, the storm's having to do a lot of the work. So to kind of bridge that, you look at whether it's something like SPC mesoanalysis, just quickly, okay, what is my background environmental SRH? Knowing the storm's still going to supplement that, what's going on? And so, again, those two, especially on severe convection, are always going to be connected. I don't know if you'll ever be able to automate one out the door without something being, taken out the other way. But that's kind of our connection. We're not deeply into the mesoanalysis. We've tried to keep that camp. There's a group that focuses in on that, and John's actually been involved with the there's an initiative with remote mesoanalysis too that's kind of spun out of this whole fun we've had with COVID in the last year. People teleworking at home, it's like, well, we got some experts. Let's see if we can have them working. But to also, help out where possible. At, if you're at home and you're like, I know that person A maybe they need a little help. I can let them know and help guide that. So anyway, that's a long answer again, but we definitely are connected with them. It's just not directly.
So Aaron, Jen Aramore here. I have a question. I wanted to go back to the warnings. I'm very familiar with your office because I do radio out of Hays, Kansas.
Yeah.
I do a weather there. And so I'm always watching what's coming out of Colorado and heading into West Kansas. And so you're like, okay, are these big super cells? Are they land spouts? But you mentioned just a minute ago that you worded the warning earlier for the land spouts a little differently. So I wanted to see if you could give us an example of how you're making that decision and what is the wording. And I'm very curious on that. And then also with the severe thunderstorm warning with the tornado tag, what criteria causes you guys to hoist those type of warnings? Because those always perk my interest, because that makes me a little bit more aware that maybe we have something else going on here. But I would just be curious, are there different scenarios of why you guys put those type of warnings out?
Sure. So for the land spout, let me start with that. We've actually got a document that we've produced internally that kind of helps guide forecasters. And this is where, the decision-making process and what we include a lot of it goes back to confidence and how likely is this to persist. So I'm not going to say that the process for dealing with land spouts is tremendously better than it was 20 years ago. But when I first started in this business, nobody really knew how to deal with a land spout report. They kind of sat around and either they wrote it down on a log, there was a land spout, and ignored it, and then started getting phone calls of people saying, why aren't you doing something? Or we went through a process of, again, you hate to say whack-a-mole, but we were playing whack-a-mole with land spouts. We'd hear a report, we put out a tornado warning, then we'd hear another one over here. Oh, now we need the warning over here. And that process really didn't serve anybody either, because what we were getting was a lot of negative feedback from, assisted living centers, hospitals, that when they put in their emergency action plans for tornadoes, they're wheeling people around hallways and other for events that were unlikely to persist. And especially out here, a lot of the land spouts are not even hardly moving. And so we designed a concept through the special weather statements, but it's really just not that. It can be through social media. It can be through NWS chat with our partners to be able to say, hey, we just got this report. It's, the land spout's either decayed or it's in the process of decaying. We don't know, if there's going to be another one, but we think this area is prime. And just message that, be more upfront that a land spout is a tornado, and nobody's going to say it's not. But, each of these types of tornadoes has a different level of predictive capability. We just don't have a lot of predictive capability with these. And so we can see the basic environment. And so it's to kind of switch up and say, I'm going to message this saying there's potential without saying we know where one is. So hopefully that answers your question on that. And then in terms of the severe with tornado possible tag, that varies a lot. Its original intent wasn't even really in the supercell side. I'm not going to say there wasn't thought of it, but the thought was more on the QLCS side to say, I've got an environment with this approaching QLCS. A lot of this is where the TWIP training on the 3 ingredients method has helped kind of move us away from that, where we just don't know. But there's environments where with the QLCS, you may not know what's the specific area. You don't necessarily see ahead of time, whether it's a rear inflow jet that's coming in that's going to cause a surge, a front reflectivity nub. These are all 3 ingredients based techniques and features we're looking for. But maybe you think the environment's generally favorable, and I'm going to, at least within the severe thunderstorm warnings I put out ahead of it, say this is possible. Now from that, we've taken it and used it a little bit differently on the supercell side for these environments where we don't have the outbreak type of low level shear. And we think the storm, even though it's looking like it's got a nice mesocyclone, boy, there's a lot of negative things going on here. Whether they're on the dual pole side, we see what's called ZD-arc disruptions. We've got a lot of stuff there, but you're not confident enough to say nothing about it. So this is kind of another way you say, well, the chances aren't 0, but it's low enough. I'm not going to pull the plug on a tornado warning, but I at least want to convey that risk. Use a Dumb and Dumber deal. You're saying there's a chance? Yeah, there's a slight chance, but not much of one. So we kind of go down that path with severe tornado possibles to just convey to whoever out there, public, partners, media, that we are noticing this storm. It's a little different than the other ones. It doesn't mean there's 0 chance, but it's an event where if it does happen, rare, maybe 1 out of 20, you're talking about something that most cases is brief, doesn't really impact much. And again, you want to avoid missed events, but there are going to be acceptable misses. And I think when we go down that path, we're conveying it without saying, 100% that this is not going to be tornadic, but yet we're comfortable with the fact that if something does happen, it's not going to be a very impactful case.
So James, our WCM at Birmingham's on the block just sent out a questionnaire to us last week asking, do we react any differently? What do you think he's going to hear from most of our partners in Central Alabama
concerning the
tornado possible tag? Yeah.
Yeah. I think for most people that do television, we don't really get into that. I mean, we know we see the warning, it's in effect until blah, blah, blah. We see the polygon, and we just kind of go tell our own story. Not that we're, trying to say anything different from the Weather Service, but I honestly don't have time to read that text. And I think we would communicate the same message most of the time. So, for me, it doesn't matter one way or the other.
Anybody else have an opinion on that? Because doing it in a text format like we normally do on the blog, do pay attention to it and do, but like James says, we're monitoring the storms at the same time. But I'm sure for some partners that are outside the meteorology field, like you said, Aaron, maybe if they can see that tag, maybe it does make them react a little differently. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's, I'm not going to say that we've done sufficient, surveys of partners and figured out. I do know that, many of our partners have gone on the record saying it doesn't tell them anything they don't already know. Say there's already a tornado watch out and they see this tag and they're like, well, yeah, I already know because there's a tornado watch, this potential's there. For others, though, they see that because, especially if it's not used as a jack of all trades. I mean, if you're just putting it in every warning, then that's no better than carpet bombing tornado warning to some degree. But if you start to, hold back on that, and I want to call it that in-between product or in-between service, but if you make it so that it's not there all the time, it's a way to step up without completely jumping over the edge. And, I've seen within the supercell side that while there's mixed reviews of how useful it is, it has allowed the forecasters internally to be able to, I want to say, feel comfortable with not having to pull the trigger, when in the past, when they had this switch on off, a lot of those folks, human factor is always going to be part of it. If they have that little fear in the back of their head, they may always go Tor. Versus now, I'm noticing more people are comfortable saying, I have something else I can use here that makes me feel okay. And knowing again that worst case scenario in most of those situations is something that's brief. If something does persist, you're going to have time to be able to upgrade. It gives them a chance to also improve, I think, just the services that are provided through that. So that may be more of an internal, security blanket, for lack of better terms, but it does provide, I think, the warning forecaster the ability to step up, because in that aspect, they're conveying something without falling completely over into the tornado.
Well, for the broadcaster side, let me jump in. For the last couple of severe thunderstorms we've had with a tornado tag on it, I have gone on air for it. And one of my big concerns is because, one, I'm in a non-severe market, but at the same time, our beam height is anywhere from 6 to about 12,000 feet. So I have no idea what's happening underneath this storm. And I would rather be on the safe side, especially in a non-severe market where I might go on air once or twice a year for a tornado warning. And the last 2 tornadoes we've had in our area have been weak. And I think both have stemmed from a severe thunderstorm warning with a tornado tag. I know the one last year did, and certainly the one in 2019. But my concern is the beam height in our area, and with that possibility all over it, just like a normal tornado warning.
Yeah, that, and it's a good point with beam height, and it kind of goes back to the limitations that we deal with our sensors. As great as they are, probably in 100 years, people will laugh at what we were using. But, the reality is, this may be shocking news for the Flat Earth Society, but as long as the Earth curves, we're going to be watching that beam head off into outer space. And the radar network's not going to get any denser. That's the hard part. I would love to see, the CASA radars. I'd like to even see mobile radars go in and fill gaps when needed, but that's pretty unlikely. I mean, I could dream, keep my fingers crossed, but so the reality is what we're using and the stuff that the TWIP has brought forward, whether it's QLCS, supercells, there are going to be varying levels. So if I'm looking at something at 90 nautical miles, a lot of what we have, it's not that you can't try to fill in the blanks what may be going on below that, but I don't want to say that the overall decision is worse. That's probably not the correct terminology, but it's almost a simpler but yet high bust potential setup, because you're really just going off of features that while important, you obviously want an updraft, but what's going on at 12,000 feet generally not having a major impact on tornado genesis to some degree, at the lowest 500 feet. And so for us to be able to assess that potential in those type of situations where the beams just don't going to overshoot all of the low levels, what we can provide is going to vary. And again, I'd love to have more radars. That would be a blessing, but I don't think that's going to happen. And so, in those situations, if a partner says, well, in our area, I really need probably a little more advanced notification, and maybe the severe with tornado possible tag is insufficient. This is where maybe in those areas you go with a tornado warning, even though, and this kind of goes back to the whole metrics, maybe there is going to be a high false alarm ratio in those areas, but you're using less data to still make it same the end game is still the same. You're still having to put out a product versus if I look at something 40 nautical miles from the radar, what I have to go through is going to be tremendously different, and likely the choice is going to be more grounded in more cutting edge science, and it's going to be improved. So, you don't want to say if you start picking out areas and saying this person gets this level of service and this person gets that, but that's just the reality of way the science and our equipment works.
I just wanted to say in terms of broadcasting on the radio for the tornado tag, I have several stations in Kansas where we do go live, and we do not cover every severe thunderstorm warning, or I would be on constantly because there's so many of them. So when I do see the tornado tag, that actually prompts me to call the station and say, okay, things have changed a little bit. We may want to try to jump on it and just at least give a quick heads up to your audience that we're kind of monitoring things, that things may change a little bit more quickly. And so we use it as a heads up, and that seems to work out very well. And I'll mention, I'll read the warning and mention what's happening, do a little bit of a radar analysis. And then we're not on there wall to wall or anything like that. That's saved for the tornado warnings. But I do use it. It prompts me to go live with any station that I do live coverage for. So it's a really, I'm so glad that you all use that. And it's great to get an analysis from you on, why you use it and all that. So thank you.
You bet.
And I just really quickly want to follow up on a really interesting thread that's been raised in this conversation. And Aubrey brought it up. The Tor possible could have different meaning in different places. And this is something that is so interesting for you all in the Weather Service to think about, that there might not be a one size fits all to these applications. There could be some places where these kinds of innovations have more value than others. This is something that we're thinking about too, with just facets and deploying probabilistic systems possibly in the future. And it's forced us to think about things like the Storm Prediction Center, the probabilities. Right now, we have a one size fits all system where, where Aubrey is, you might, the slight risk might be your Ben or day. And, you might want to do a whole series of things, including, cut-ins for different kinds of events than you would have in the plains. And maybe what we should be thinking about is, how likely is this compared to what you're used to? So comparing to some, climatology, something like this, to really give that, that probability that this could exist, the oomph that it has for that place, sort of a place-centered approach to forecasting in severe, where right now we just kind of assume it's the same for everyone. So really interesting discussion. And I'm not sure if you want to comment on that specific point, but you might have felt some of this as you've been working even with other regions, that there's just that difference.
Yeah, I mean, even in the land spout stuff, we found very early on, there was a level of comfort that we were okay with to message differently just because they're so common, especially into the central plains, versus started talking outside of our region or points east, and they're kind of comfortable with not putting out a tornado warning because that may be the banner event for the year. And so it's like that with anything. We see it when winter weather, how people react to the first winter storm is so different than the third or fourth winter storm. They don't know how to drive. All of a sudden they've forgotten that ice is slick. It's just all these things come along, and people's behaviors are so much different with that first event. And I don't want to say they become tone deaf, but over time they tend to just tune it out. And, it's where, going back to the tornado warnings, if you've had a busy year, if you're on event number 12, I don't know, a lot of people may not pay attention as much versus if it's that first event and it's an early season event, boy, will folks pay attention. And so a lot of that goes back to how you message something. You can do it in terms of climatology. That's, our main gain here with the TWIP isn't necessarily to get into the messaging game, but yet we are, if that makes sense. We're trying to figure out how you convey risk potential that can let folks know, okay, this is a very real risk, this is a low probability risk. Some way to at least give them more than just warn, no warn. And, how successful we are at that, I don't know. Facets is going to dig into a lot more of that, as you said, whether it's some partners will love probability plumes out to 90 minutes. Some others will say, nope, I don't need that. For example, I mentioned with the landspouts, the assisted living centers, the nursing homes, the hospitals. Well, they may want the action plans to at least say, okay, we need to start going to step one. They're not going to start moving people out of the ICU 60 minutes ahead of time for a low probability event. They're just not going to do that. And so each individual, each entity is going to have a different comfort level. And yep, I mean, sometimes it's climatology. Low frequency events in some areas is a major issue. And sometimes it's not necessarily the event itself, it's how people react to it. The chaos. Everybody go outside and start looking around. Stop on the highway. Here comes a tornado. What do I do? Get under the girders. Sorry, I had to bring that up. But, all these are things that I would say they go well beyond the TWIP. We're just trying to make sure that there's sound science that impacts the messaging. But all of this is important. There's no way you can break them apart.
Hey, John, can you hear us? Let's bring John in here. Hello, John.
Hey, am I too early?
I mean, I can take a break.
Sorry, I hate to bust the party up too early there. It's one of those things where the PC's probably sat here for too long and just locked everything up, and I don't know. So it's you watch the little wheel spin for 20 minutes while it reboots, and that's where I'm at. So hi.
So how's Aaron been doing? Give Aaron a grade.
Well, I've been listening to him for 20 minutes now, and no, it's good. Aaron and I, we chat about this stuff every day, and it's great. We think a lot alike, but at times we take a look at, especially doing the research that we do, from different angles, and that's critical to figuring out ultimately what's the best road of action to take. So it's he's been doing well, no problems.
All right, so let me change directions real quick, and then we'll let Bill pick it back up, and we'll let Bill toke on his number for a little bit, and we'll talk about this topic here. So tornado emergency, and this is for Aaron and John. I guess this came out of Kim. This came out of Norman, right? Rick Smith's office there for, I forget which tornado. Was it Moore?
It was Moore. It was the May 3rd.
Moore.
May 3rd, 99,
okay.
Yep.
So here we are in 2021, and I just want to hear from both of you guys your thoughts on that, because I have heard from some people that say, not a lot of people, and I am not saying it's a bad thing, but I do know I've heard some feedback from people that say, well, it's not a tornado emergency, it's a tornado warning. I'm not going to worry about it. What are your thoughts on that? John, you go ahead. Go.
All right. So, it's another aspect to consider as the warning forecaster, because, we have a number of things that we think about before we would issue a tornado emergency. But one of the things we deal with here in the plains is what size of town constitutes an emergency. Is if this supercell with the tornado is headed right toward a town of 1,000 or maybe less, but it's going to go rolling right through town, is that still a tornado emergency? So, I don't know that it kind of goes back again to not having one size fits all, possibly. Although the intent of the emergency is that it is, something anomalous. It's something that's certainly catastrophic. And we've seen it used a few times here and there, probably more frequently down in the Southeast. But it certainly heightens the level of what is considered importance. But I have heard that argument of people saying, well, it's not an emergency, so I probably won't take action unless I see it bearing down. But again, it goes back to the social science work that has looked at all this, and knowing that people need 3 different forms of verification of the same thing. So you can issue a tornado warning, but they still have to hear it from a friend, and they still have to go outside and see it for themselves before action's actually taken. So I guess this is kind of the intent to maybe skip over some of that.
All right, Aaron, what say you?
Well, it's nice to catch my breath there for a few minutes. Thank you, John. But yeah, I mean, I echo what John says. Ultimately, I think the end state of this, and of course we're 22 years past that point, was an attempt to try to message and convey something that's different, how anomalous it is. I think there's differing levels of action that comes out of that. In the almost 12 years I've worked at this office, we've only used it twice. Of course, Greensburg was the one time just prior to me getting here that obviously everything was justified. The 2 other times we had a fairly long track tornado that just barely missed a town. And I think it was justified, but we got some pushback from it. And then the last one was, I guess 5 years ago now, on May 4th, 2016, we just had a tornado palooza around Dodge City, and west side of Dodge got clipped. And I don't know if it was really an emergency per se, but for the people whose homes that were hit, there was an older couple that were sitting in their recliners, which apparently they didn't have their no weather radio or anything else because they weren't paying attention. All of a sudden their roof went off and their walls collapsed, and fortunately they were okay. But was that a tornado emergency for them? Yeah, it probably was, although ultimately the message still didn't get around to them. So I sometimes do question who's getting this information, and is it changing people's actions? Because that's probably one of the biggest frustrations I've had in my career is what I'm doing, even if it's improving the decision making, are people still taking action, or are they just checking out? And that kind of goes back to the whole what was discussed with how rare is an event. Some folks, by the time they get to middle of June, they're just tone deaf to severe weather, and they'll drive their car right into baseball size hail because whatever. But the tornado emergency was an attempt, and I think it was successful, to convey how anomalous and how big an event was. We've added a couple different layers since then with our impact-based warnings with a considerable tag now. And what's the difference between a catastrophic and considerable? Well, I guess it depends what you want to view there. I have seen both of those at times underutilized, and I've seen them overutilized. The end game here is to try to take a science-based decision and try to message it somehow to provide that risk. But I'd be lying if I didn't say I'm not sure everybody's getting it, based off the example I just gave, where 5 years ago, this older couple basically had their house collapse on them, and they didn't even know there was a warning. So who's getting it? I don't know. How useful is it? It probably varies. I think, especially for those of us in the weather enterprise, we're paying attention to that stuff. But we're really not the ones that are probably going to be the biggest benefactors of that information. It's the people that are in the general public that may or may not pay attention. And so how do we get that information to them? There's, of course, the wireless emergency alerts. Maybe that's how you get that emergency out to them better. I don't know. But what works now may not work in 10, 15 years. And so I've learned through many of things that, not to get my foot too set in one spot, because we may come out with something in 10 years that says, boy, that's the worst thing we could have ever done.
This is probably a Kim question too, but the one thing I guess I'm concerned about with a tornado emergency, it seems like when I ask everybody within the Weather Service, it's based on population centers to some degree. So my question is, so you've got a population center of 80,000 people. So you got a town of 2,000 people with a violent EF5 approaching, and they're not going to do a tornado emergency for those 2,000 people. Is their life any less important than the 80,000 people in that big city? And I guess part of my problem, you guys are a bunch of big city, slick people here. I'm some country bumpkin from rural South Alabama. And it's like nobody pays attention to people that live in rural areas anymore. You got to live in a city or else you're not served adequately. And I guess that's the only thing I just question about this tornado emergency thing is, well, if it's going to hit Birmingham or Tuscaloosa or, a big city, then yeah, yeah. But what if it's going to hit East Aboga or Andalusia or Slick-Lillet? Kim, what do you say about this? You're our social scientist here. Is a tornado emergency a good thing or a bad thing?
The idea of an emergency, I think, is a really interesting idea that has real potential value to it. And I can understand why, and I've never sat in a hot seat. I can understand why a forecaster would want to have that tool in their tool belt. I feel for your other point, though, about it being a population sort of biased product. And I believe there's been some research that's looked into whether it is applied more often in heavily populated areas. And I think the answer to that is yes. Seeing nods. And so friend of the show, Deke Arndt, who was on a couple of months ago, he's at NCEI now, but he is similarly from, rural Oklahoma. And as soon as IBW emerged and tornado emergencies in general, when this was all being discussed after the tornadoes of 2011, he was a very passionate advocate for considering the plight of the rural person. And I think that there's a real question we have to address in our field. What are we trying to design this for? Are we trying to say that there's a potential for a mass casualty event, and in which case something like that, maybe a population biased product makes some sense. But if we're not careful, I do have concerns, James, that we do exactly what you say, that we treat different populations, as though their lives matter differently through our approach. And it's just something that we need to think about. There's like Aaron, you've been talking about this whole time. There's not a perfect. All of these things that we're debating about are really value judgments. And there's not a one size fits all for all the people that we serve. We have to think about how is it that we can try to do the best for the most people that we can. And that's a really tough question. So I feel for everyone all around the board on this. My personal view, not having ever been in the hot seat to have to issue a warning or convey it, is that I see the warning communication ecosystem as something that systematically disadvantages rural people, from television, where attention is paid more to urban populations by mandate from management, through to possibly even the origin of warnings within the Weather Service if we're trying to do impact-based warning, and impacts are just going to be higher in urban populations. Tough nut to crack.
Well, I wanted to say that your couple in Dodge City, Aaron, if they'd had the latest invention from Midland Weather Radio, we've got Bruce Jones joining us now. He can talk about it. The EZ5000. It's a recliner that's equipped with a NOAA Weather Radio shaker in it. And depending on the tag, it intensifies the shaking. Don't you think that's a good idea? So yeah, Bruce, it's good to have you here tonight. Welcome back to what we're innovating for your product.
Yeah, that's a great idea. yeah, it doesn't need to have a beer cooler on it too, so you can just sit there and let the whole storm go by.
There you go. Well, now I'll work on that modification next. And so, that's interesting because, I was reading Mike Smith's book again, as we come up on the anniversary of Joplin. And planning for a show about that. And he predicted that the impact-based warnings were going to be a terrible disaster. And I somehow don't think they have, but it kind of was an epiphany to me while we were talking, or while y'all were talking, that perhaps it's this differentiation of different kinds of warnings that he perceived was going to be a problem. Troy, you're shaking your head. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, to some degree I do, and I respect Mike and what he's saying, but we go back to what Aaron pointed out. You got the severe thunderstorm warning, you got the severe thunderstorm warning, possible tornado tag, and you have the tornado warning that maybe we're trying to do too much and kind of losing people. People are confused anyway. I mean, we're having that discussion right now, Aaron and John, about we're going to get rid of the word advisory. Why? Because it's confusing. And I often say sometimes that some of the greatest failures we've seen, not weather related, are when people try to do too much and they don't do very well in anything they do as a result of. I'm not saying that's the case here, but it's just something that I would be a little bit worried about.
So
John, counterpoint.
Yeah,
I want to jump in and put a counterpoint to that, though. I want to know what the forecaster knows. I want to know what they're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the best way. And, the whole reason they're tags is because it's easier for machines to read them and parse them and turn them into pretty graphics on our display systems and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, we're having conversations about what future warnings might look like and how frequently they might be updated and that sort of thing. And, my take on it is, as somebody who is sort of sitting in the middle and an intermediary in that communication, I want to know everything the person sending the warning knows. I want to know what they're thinking. And the more they can provide me that insight that goes above and beyond severe thunderstorm warning for such and such county until such and such time, which is sort of the baseline product. Anything that we can get, whether that's an IBW tag, whether that's differentiating between observed, catastrophic, or whether that's we've talked a lot about NWS chat on this program, some sort of insight into what they're thinking for a couple different reasons. Number one, they're the ones pushing the button to say this is a warning. And so their thought process behind that, and whether they choose to extend that warning, whether they cancel it early, et cetera, all those I think are really important. But the second thing is, in a lot of cases, and sort of going back to Kim's point about rural America, a lot of times if you're working a severe weather event in a small market TV station, you may be the only person there. There may not be another meteorologist that you can go point at that radar image and go, what do you think's happening there? And so having access to what the Weather Service forecaster is thinking is gold. For one, it helps you understand the situation better. Helps you communicate it better.
Well, Nate, real quick question. I think you may have joined after James said something that got my attention a little bit, and that is the TV broadcasters out there. How many of those TV broadcasters, when they're on the air live, actually see those tags? And that's one thing that I kind of wonder about a little bit myself. And
I made the comment on this workshop I was in today in a breakout group that we were in a tornado emergency on April 16th, 2011. I was live on television and I didn't know it. I didn't need to know it because I had the bloody thing on a live camera.
Right.
And I had the radar signature from my radar and from a Weather Service radar and an FAA radar. I didn't need that.
Yeah.
Having said that, the display systems today are all capable of doing that. You can automatically have it pop up and tell you what the impact tags are, whether it's confirmed or not. You can have the polygons change color. These are fairly new advancements, but I think anything that sort of surfaces that out of the warning text is I think that's sort of goes back to our conversations about NWS chat and just how critical that is, not only for it to work, but for Weather Service offices to be plugged in and engaged on that. Is that bit of information is probably more important than the warning itself. Especially in a high-end event, I'm a big fan of telling me what they think. Just type me a sentence or two into what you're thinking about that, because that helps me as a broadcaster talking about it. And you've done this too, to couch that. Am I ramping this up? Am I ramping it down? Are we worried about this, being bad? In some cases, I'm seeing these things. We're looking a lot of times at the same radar data. but 2 heads are better than 1, 3 heads are better than 2, and any sort of insight that they can input into that process helps me blend with everything else that we're getting in the TV station to make decisions about whether to stay on. I think one of the biggest things right now that we're dealing with is how long to stay on. If a tornado warning expires, and we saw this in Nashville a year and a half ago, where tornado warning got dropped because the storm cycled down a little bit, people sort of ducked, and then bam, we had a tornado. And those are the kinds of things where maybe if we stay on and we just bridge that, if I know that they're just sitting on it, but they can't quite pull the trigger yet, but they're close, maybe we stay on for another 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, and maybe that gets us back into a warning. Warning gets issued again, and we're not having to duck back in and out, which just makes people mad and everything else. So I mean, I hear the concerns about it, about do we have the skill on all of this? And that's I think a fundamental question, is that we need to go back and do a really comprehensive assessment of all of these tags. How many of them? What's the skill level of these things? How do they verify or not? How trustworthy are they or not? I imagine there's going to be some office to office variability and forecaster to forecaster variability. That sort of thing is natural. But it'd be nice to know, sort of how good at that we are. And we know, sort of like from the SPC standpoint, we know that when you look at the 5 sort of categories we have now, they're pretty good at nailing those categories. They have some day, here and there, but generally speaking, they're pretty good. I want to know what the forecast tags are, but generally speaking, that insight of the decision making of why they're pulling the trigger or not, that to me, that's gold.
Well, I got a question. One quick question, I promise. The last one, I'll shut up. For John, yeah, you know that.
Sorry, I'm just coming and taking over, but
Sure.
I'm on fire.
But for John and for Aaron, and not that I expect you to know this, but do we have any idea on SVRs what percentage may be tornado possible? Is there any statistic on that?
Boy, that's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't.
That
We
might
could probably
be
ask
something.
last week's guest and have the answer in about 10 minutes, right,
Yeah,
Troy?
yes, we could. That might be something that's in the Brooks and Korea paper from last year, or the year before, on warning performance. They looked at TOR possibles. I don't have that offhand, but I think that's a place that they might have enumerated it.
Thank you.
All right, the air traffic controller gives up. I do not know who's next. I'm just going
It's
to
me.
let anybody land.
It's
I was going
Jen.
to say, yeah, just really quick, I wanted to agree with Nate on what he was just saying here about, especially when you're running solo on the air. I run solo every time on the radio stations. So I rely heavily on what the National Weather Service is saying in terms, every time I get a warning, and I get a lot of them, because I sometimes am covering 2 or 3 markets at once, I immediately look at the tag, and what is the criteria and what is going on. I have 8 chat rooms open and I'm watching every dialogue that's going on, because it's just little old me. And I have to determine, do I pull the trigger to go wall to wall coverage or not? What is happening? What is the assessment? And their information is amazing and is necessary. And so I just wanted to, as someone who needs more than just my brain, I really appreciate all of your brains helping me have a direction to give the best coverage that I can to inform the public.
I feel that I really resonate with this, issue you guys are talking about, where you on the broadcast side have to do some triage. And so you are mining for information to help you to develop priorities. And it makes sense sometimes that triaging is going to be weighted toward where the most people are. I think in my mind, I go back to the point that, Nate was kind of talking about with verification, how good are these things. And from the beginning, this was also something Mike was talking about, Mike Smith, when the IBWs began. His concern was in part, can we really do this? It strikes me that, you're trying to get from the forecaster, Aaron and John, you were trying to get from you guys in your offices what you know. And it strikes me that the impacts piece of this, you're actually talking about the thing you know the least about, which is what exactly is going to be hit. And, you know more about the atmosphere. And so impacts are such a nonlinear societal process that go on underneath the atmosphere and that we observe so little about. And I feel like what's going on here is a small conflation between, impact and just how sure you are a tornado exists. Have we kind of skipped a step and gone and skipped straight over what actually Facets is trying to do now with developing the probability plumes out ahead of a storm? Could that be really the answer to what Nate and Jen are saying they're looking for? Is we want to know how much forecasters know about the storm, and then the rest of it, maybe the rest of the communication system is on the hook for making those decisions about, okay, so what does that mean for what I cover and what's prioritized? If that's just something you guys can talk about. John, I saw you bring your mic down. I'm just fascinated by your feelings on that.
Yeah, I'm involved in the Facets end of things too, in the Science Advisory Board. So it's very interesting to see all that, and having done work in the HWT with the fee plumes and all that. It's interesting to see, one of the first questions that gets asked when you come in to work on the fee is what's your tipping point? Basically, what's your level at which you finally go over the edge to issue that tornado warning, and how does that figure into some sort of probability of what's going to occur? So it's and I think every person again is going to be so different on what their tipping point is, but also how they convey that. One of the things that my staff hears from me constantly is, tell them what you know. And there's various ways to do that. And maybe it's conveyed in the tags that you include in a warning. But most likely it's some other science aspect that you're struggling to find a way to communicate. And so that's where NWS chat comes along, and you try to do your best in there. And then, as I hear, if you got 18 chat windows open as a broadcast meteorologist, how can you really, digest all that information? So it's, and I think Aaron alluded to it earlier, we're coming at it from the TWIP, from a science perspective. In other words, that groundwork has to be there first for you to be able to convey what that means, beyond that to somebody else.
So Jen, I'm sorry, Aaron, go ahead. And then I
was just going to add, at the end of the day, and the reason that the TWIP and John and I are on it is, if we don't make the initial decision correctly, a lot of what we're talking about is kind of a moot point. So if I can't decipher that, yeah, this storm has a nice circulation, but a lot of non-tornadic storms have nice circulations. If I'm just going to hit the panic button, then a lot of what we're saying doesn't, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but it's a side issue. And so first we have to improve the science and let that then help us make better choices with our messaging. You kind of mentioned James there with, are we prioritizing population centers with tornado emergency? I looked it up just to make sure. Nowhere within our directive does it specifically say, only warn if the population is X amount. But there's some inferences with, threat to human life. Well, some people say a person grew up in inner city, wherever, million plus population, and to them anything that's 10,000 or less is just the middle of nowhere. Versus, I also grew up in a rural area, and so I kind of take that to heart, because I'd see somebody's farm destroyed 5 miles from me, and yeah, maybe there wasn't anybody else hit, but that was an emergency for them. So that may be a consistency issue as well. It's not something really that TWIP has delved into, and it's kind of a policy driven thing that we don't necessarily want to get into per se. But population bias is probably always going to be there with decision making, just because you're going to have some folks that prioritize the city over the rural area, or the metro area over the smaller town. I could say out here, because we just don't have any metro areas. Dodge City is our metro area. It's a little easier for us to go, yep, tornado emergency. But if you're if you're at the Chicago office, 70 miles southwest of Joliet, Illinois, okay, so it's a bunch of soybeans, and does that matter? I don't know. To me, I would still, if the science says there's a threat for, or there's ongoing, in this case with the tornado, there's ongoing tornado that can pose significant threat to life and property, I'm probably still going to say somebody needs to know that this is different. But I'm not obviously making every warning, but I kind of fit a little more into your realm, James, that does matter to me. Maybe I'm biased towards lower rural areas, lower population rural areas. That's just had that in my head from day one. And so it's harder for me to let go of that. But it is interesting that it's not a specific population threshold, but there's some inferences that kind of imply, well, if there's no threat to human life, or there's a low risk because there's not as many people, doesn't matter. And I don't have the answer to that. I think it does. I think even a low risk is worth mentioning, but that's my take.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Jen, sometime when you have severe weather on a Monday night, we just want to put you over there and mute you and occasionally listen to what you do, because I imagine it's pretty amazing to listen to you managing 3 or 4 markets at the same time with active weather. And I want to give John a second to talk about the storm relative velocity enhancement, because that caught our attention at the Central Iowa NWA chapter symposium this year. John, I don't know how much you can share with us that will be useful, but what can we do to convey some information, from what you and Aaron and the rest of the team have learned in terms of helping us pick out these tornadic versus non-producing storms?
Yeah, that's kind of something that Aaron and I have been working on for several years now, actually, and I'm sure you guys kind of hit on it earlier in my hiatus that we're after trying to use the science to anticipate tornado genesis rather than react to it. So there's a lot of science out there, research, high resolution simulations and things in modeling world that have come to light, that a lot of people have seen, all the Leor stuff and that. And then, so that stuff is really great stuff, and it's advanced over the last decade just immensely. Then you kind of step back into our world where you're trying to make a warning decision, and if you want to get to the point where you're anticipating and not reacting, you have to find some association with that research world to what it is we're seeing on the 88D. And the SRVE, the storm relative velocity enhancement, is one of those things. The hardest part we have as scientists is to figure out a way to make this non-speculative. In other words, what we're seeing on the 88D is not the same as what is being modeled in high resolution simulations. We know that. But is there a correlation or like I said, an association to this particular enhancement region, which originates in the forward flank and is a descending airstream that makes its turn around the developing low-level mesocyclone. There are some indications there when you do a literal interpretation of the velocity signature there, where if you're seeing a convergent signature with that airstream positioned correctly underneath the low-level mesocyclone, there could be some a much better chance for tornado genesis to happen there, assuming that the buoyancy is what it needs to be, which is another part of the equation to the whole thing, is being able to interpret through the 88D what kind of buoyancy you might be dealing with the outflow that's coming out of the forward flank to lead to tornado genesis. And so that's actually another thing that we've done with the TWIP throughout the last couple of years is, we have this dual pole data, which was heavily advertised as being able to help us identify hydrometeor type. Well, can we use that to make some sort of assumption what the buoyancy level of your downdraft is going to be based on your hydrometeor character. If you have a lot of rain and hail in that downdraft, it's probably not going to be favorably buoyant for the rapid stretching to occur, even if you have a very strong low-level mesocyclone. However, if you're seeing a nice ZDR arc, for example, that is not disrupted by a hail signature, for example, then maybe you have a little bit more confidence in what that buoyancy is going to be with a strong developing low-level mesocyclone. So the survey fits into that as being an airstream, which, again, based on some of the work done by Parker and Dahl and all and several others, is a descending airstream. And so being able to pick that out is the trick for a warning forecaster. Am I seeing this particular thing that probably more closely parallels the left flank convergent boundary, which has been written about by some folks back a few years ago? Just identifying convergent boundaries within that forward flank region. So kind of what we've seen over the last few weeks as Aaron and I get to looking at more and more, we've looked at hundreds of cases and starting to pick these out and being able to pick out what is a survey compared to what is an SVC, because they are not the same. The SVC is an ascending airstream, whereas what comes out of the forward flank into tornado land is a descending airstream. So that's what we're trying to do with the 88D. Again, it's a huge leap. We know that it's not it's not a one-to-one comparison with what's being shown in the high-resolution simulations. But we've talked to those researchers that are doing that and had some really great communications with them. So there's still a ways to go on that. And but again, it all comes back to the goal of being able to anticipate what's going to happen compared to what is being reacted to.
So John and Aaron, how can our listeners and viewers access your research in that regard, and especially the papers that you showed at Iowa, so they can begin to try to make some sense of those radar images?
Well, we do have those. Oh, go ahead, John.
Nope, you go for it.
Oh, I was going to say, we do have these reference guides available. Most of it, though, is on our internal site. If somebody's interested, matter of fact, I guess I could share the screen here. Bill, you were kind of showing the reference guide, but I can show this so that hopefully you can see my screen.
Perfect.
Okay, so for example, this is the supercell-based tornado genesis radar feature reference guide. So, this is just a quick reference, but right from the start, you can see we have, in these columns, we've got the feature, primary application, and then skill to predict tornado genesis along with notes. And so, for example, the ones that we've used for many years, whether it's, looking for the hook, looking for storm depth, max rotational velocity, low VR, these are great diagnostic tools, but they don't really help us in a consistent manner to predict tornado genesis versus the ZDR arc that has connections to the low-level meso in a prognostic manner. Separation vector angle, that's connected to it. But this storm relative velocity enhancement we're talking about is this airstream that's going below. And so we do provide examples within this reference guide. As you can see here, here's the example of the arc and what it looks like. This is 10 minutes ahead of time. Here's the separation vector that builds with the ZD arc, and this would be more of your weaker low-level shear environments, as noted here. So it's less critical to do this when you have higher, but in this lower shear, you want to have this high orthogonality. Or here's the ZD arc, and we look for these disruptions, a lot of negative buoyancy. But here's the conceptual models that John and I have put together for this survey and this airstream, and then some examples here, what it looks like in a tornadic versus a non-tornadic example. And so while those aren't necessarily out there in the public domain, if somebody is interested in that, feel free to email us. We can share that with them. That's nothing we're trying to hide. Matter of fact, the more the merrier. So that's why we were all for sharing There's a similar QLCS reference guide that was released a few years ago. And so we kind of built on that. And listen, a lot of this is going to be a work in progress, but hopefully Aaron.Johnson@noaa.gov or John.Stopcotty@noaa.gov, send us an email. We're more than willing to share this stuff.
Would you guys be willing to put together like a little YouTube presentation on it? I would rather listen and hear your expertise with the presentation instead of just going through the slides. I think it resonates so much more.
We actually do have a couple of YouTube videos.
Oh, well, perfect.
As part of a science sharing series. Now, maybe John can answer this. I don't know if those are publicly available or not.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I think the YouTube videos may be, if you're able to find them. So, you know, one of the things that there's very little time to try and get all this stuff done. But as far as making them available outside of for the Weather Service forecasting realm, I guess I'm not sure where we're at on that or what the likelihood on that is. But we've certainly done some, you know, webinars with the Iowa NWA conference and that sort of thing. And so a lot of that recording is out there already on a lot of those kinds of things. So I think they're out there. We hope to, again, put more of this stuff together as time allows. And one of the things that the forecasters, the Weather Service forecasters have available to them is something on the TWIP page called Radar Feature Catalogs. And that's really what that's designed to do, is to show many examples of these features that we're talking about, you know, in various settings. The survey, for example, because it's an airstream, is very dependent upon the radar viewing angle. So sometimes it may be totally orthogonal to the radar beam, and it's going to look something totally different than it would look like if the airstream was along the radar beam. So all stuff that's in the works. So, but we can certainly maybe talk to you offline a little bit more about how that, how we can, you know, convey some of this, you know, that may fit into the broadcasting realm a little better.
Is it something y'all could come back and do a quick show one night, you know, maybe another 20 or 30 minutes on another show that we could walk through the slides a little more slowly? Would that be within the legal realm?
We would certainly check on the talk to the lawyers on that one.
Yeah,
no,
let the lawyers and the agents talk. James, I want you around when Jeremy starts, so let's do what you're about to
let's
do
take
there.
a quick break here. We'll go to Tony Rice and then Jen's This Week in Tornado History. We're going to come back with the Weather Roundup, picks of the week, and much more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your Astronomy Outlook.
This past weekend marked the 100th anniversary of the Great Geomagnetic Storm of May 1921. It's the most intense ever recorded by ground-level magnetometers. An aurora, normally only seen in polar regions, were seen as far south as Samoa, not that far from the equator. This happened as a coronal mass ejection, or CME, pummeled Earth's magnetic field. As that magnetic field rapidly changed, electricity flowed through any conductor it could find, and voltages spiked as high as 1,000 volts in telephone and telegraph systems worldwide. The event has also become known as the New York Railroad Superstorm, after a control tower near Grand Central Station burst into flames, taking out the entire switching and signaling system of the New York Central Railroad. Now, space weather didn't exist as a discipline in 1921. The concept of CMEs really didn't emerge until the 70s, when the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory's Orbiting Solar Observatory captured the first images of a CME. Technicians first thought that their cameras were failing, but when it was compared with other images and to earlier observations during solar eclipses, the phenomenon was discovered and continues to be studied today. Like any destructive weather event, this space weather event begs the question, could it happen again, and what might the impact be today? Part of that answer lies in the lesser but still significant storm of March 1989, when a CME 36 Earths wide produced auroras far south as central Texas and the Florida Panhandle. It plunged Quebec's electrical grid into darkness for hours and also impacted grids in New York and New England. The storm also impacted communications with geosynchronous satellites like NOAA's fleet of GOES weather satellites down to science satellites in low Earth orbit. Space weather experts say that it's not a matter of if, but when a Carrington-level event might happen again. A 2013 Royal Academy of Engineering report put such an event happening within any 50-year period at even odds, and at 95% within a 250-year period. What's driving those probabilities isn't just the frequency of CMEs, which varies from 3 a day during solar maximum to about 1 every 5 days during minimums like the one we're in now and were in during the 1921 event. It's really a matter of geometry. That is, where the sunspots occur on the face of the sun. Most of those flares will be directed above or below Earth, but that's why forecasters at NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center in Boulder, Colorado, keep a special eye on the equatorial region. Even at the 1 million mile an hour that most CMEs travel, we still have a couple of days warning. Elsewhere in the sky, early this week, look for Mercury in the western sky after sunset. It will be your last chance to see this elusive planet, most often hidden by the sun's glare, until October. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history. When we think of Gerald, Texas and tornadoes, we immediately remember the devastating F5 from May 27, 1997. But 8 years earlier, on May 17, 1989, the town was hit hard by an F3 in the middle of the night. It developed at 3:02 a.m. Central Time, about 3 miles south-southwest of Gerald, near Strickland Grove. The tornado moved to the north and northeast and paralleled I-35, where it turned over about 18 trucks. Traffic was halted on the interstates and other roads because of all of the debris. The tornado proceeded north and then northeast over the town of Gerald, with most of the damage on the south and east side of town. 35 homes and 12 mobile homes were heavily damaged or totally destroyed. 16 business structures, a 12-unit apartment complex, and 2 school buildings were destroyed. The debris from the town was scattered northeast over the countryside for about 7 miles. 1 woman was killed in her mobile home when it was demolished. She was found crushed under the debris and a waterbed. 28 people were injured during this event. We document this Gerald event and hundreds more on our website, tornadotalk.com. Calling all weather enthusiasts. Join the American Meteorological Society by becoming a member of the band at amsweatherband.org. As an AMS Weatherband member, you'll get to go behind the scenes with the scientists of the American Meteorological Society, whose members have been at the forefront of weather, water, and climate research for over 100 years. You'll learn about the very latest research from the scientists who are actually doing it. What's more, you'll become a part of a passionate online community of weather enthusiasts. Get access to exclusive videos, webinars, and other fun content, and support the science you love. Learn more and join the band today at amsweatherband.org.
Thanks to the AMS for their sponsorship of the show. The Weather Band is great, a great new invention. So if you haven't joined yet, you need to. If you haven't joined Jen's Tornado Talk website yet, you need to do that too. Thanks, Jen, for that. And thanks to Tony Rice for what he does. I was out lining the driveway last night at 8 o'clock waiting for the International Space Station to go over. And I'm going to be waiting this Friday night for the Chinese space station. So it's going to be Space Station Palooza. Thanks also to Midland Weather Radio. Bruce joins us every week at this time. And while this EZ5000 was a creation of my mind, it's not so far-fetched that y'all would come up with something just as innovative, Bruce.
Yeah, you know, one thing we've been working on is a GPS-enabled NOAA weather radio, so that you don't really have to program it. It'll automatically know where it is. And
but remember, that word is verboten now, Bruce. It's not programming a weather radio.
That's right.
It's setting up a weather radio.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the reminder. It'll set up itself. It will set itself up. You know, they're not that difficult to program or set up, but nobody likes to read a manual anymore. So the easier you can make things for folks, so they can just plug and play, so to speak, that's the best way to do it. And that's our goal, is to always make it as simple as possible. But they are wonderful life-saving devices. And in the aftermath of a big disaster, a presidentially declared disaster, FEMA gives the state's hazard mitigation grant program money And emergency managers can use that money to purchase weather radios, and FEMA will pay up to 75% of the cost of those. So if you're an emergency manager and you're in a state that has had a presidentially declared disaster within the last 2 years, any county in the state can apply for those funds. You don't have to have been included in that original disaster. The funds are available for any county in the state as long as you were in a presidentially declared disaster. So that's the FEMA Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, or HMGP funding. I've worked with a lot of counties that have used that because, it's a lot more efficient to buy an indoor weather radio for every home in the city rather than putting up outdoor sirens. They're just expensive and they don't do as good a job. So if you're a fan of WeatherBrains, we have a special offer for you. Number one, we'd really like for you just to advocate on behalf of the NOAA Weather Radio Network, because the National Weather Service runs this fantastic network. It's a free service. You just need to get yourself a receiver. And the signals cover about 98% of the US population. They also work up in Canada, and Mexico uses these radios for their earthquake warning system. So these devices are wonderful. They're lifesavers, but you have to buy one. You have to buy a receiver. So if you, as a WeatherBrains fan, can convince your family, your friends of the importance of having multiple and redundant ways of getting these warnings, then encourage them to get a weather radio. And if you go to Midland, USA and use the promo code SPAN25, that's SPANN25, SPANN25, SPAN25, you get 25% off all the weather products and accessories at midlandusa.com. So we have different radios for different things. That white radio there, that's for use at home. And then we have the emergency crank radio. With hurricane season coming, it's important to have a radio you can take with you during either an evacuation or a shelter in place that allows you to crank and generate electricity to recharge your smartphone. Survival radio like that red one there is 5 of the items that you should have in your Hurricane Go Kit. So if you don't have a Go Kit yet, that's a good way to get it started. 5 of them in that emergency crank radio: AM radio, FM, weather radio, flashlight, and the ability to recharge your smartphone. Just use the promo code SPAN25, SPANN25, when you go to midlandusa.com. And thanks to the National Weather Service for running this fantastic network of 1,033 transmitters that operate 24/7, 365 to give you information and save lives.
And another important thing there in the fine print in the lower right-hand corner is free shipping over $100, Bruce. That's helpful. Well, thank you for being here, Bruce. It's a very special show for us tonight, even though we haven't talked about it a lot. I know Nate, he really keyed in on this when Jeremy sent the initial email. Jeremy, you've done an amazing work tonight. But before we get away, I want James to just pontificate for a minute about getting to 800. James, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and we started this with really no intent of anybody ever listening to the show. Really, I mean,
at least you're honest.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just as honest as could be, and I was not the host. David Black, who was more of a professional, broadcaster type guy, ran the show, and it was 30 minutes. It was tightly produced, and it's kind of morphed into this 2.5-hour bonanza every Monday night. But I look back on it and I have learned so much from these people. I mean, we got to give Bill Murray an attaboy as our guest booking officer. I mean, he's the engine that drives this thing. Bill, you have done an amazing job getting everybody in the weather enterprise on this show. So thanks for the knowledge we have all shared over these years.
I've just been lucky, James, to have been a part of it from the beginning. I was honored that you asked me to be on. And when, the show had, like you said, great production quality with David. But I just had a wild hair one day and thought, let's start inviting some, big names. And back then you used to have to explain what it was. They didn't know what a podcast was. They had no idea why we called it WeatherBrains. And now it's, fairly well known through meteorological circles. So that helps. And the fact that we got off Google Hangouts, James, that's been the biggest blessing to me.
Yes, the guests can actually get on the show now.
That's for sure. But James, anything else you want to add? I know we're going to talk through each one of the shows that Jeremy's picked out from our YouTube era. They all bring back real big memories.
What I'm going to do, I got to go to Studio A. I can't wait to listen to this. I mean, I'm going to go right to this segment in the car late tonight or tomorrow when I get home. But Jeremy, thanks, and I can't wait. So let's do it.
All right, Jeremy, take it away.
Of course. And just to go ahead and just say, everyone, on behalf of all the listeners over the years, thank you for everyone on the panel for all of the work that you do. I mean, I know you all have obviously regular jobs and everything. So to do this each and every single week for 800 episodes strong, I think I will say a round of applause from all of our listeners and behalf of all the listeners out there. Thank you so much for everything that you do. Picking out the top 10 was quite a task. And I think at this point, I'm going to have a little bit of fun as I walk you through the top 10 episodes of WeatherBrains since its inception on YouTube on May 29th of 2012. Now, at episode 10 is a very interesting show title. And if you've been a listener for the show for a very long time, at some point or another, someone's going to yell show title. Well, here are some interesting show titles from the previous, let's say 600 episodes or so since it went on YouTube. 475, WeatherBrains After Dark. 438, Who Turned on Aubrey. 379, It's on the Sizzle Sauce. 700, We Met in a White House Bathroom. 742, Women Who Named Their Butt Cheeks. 478, Why Are We at the Day's Inn? Oh, the memories. But at number 10 is
how have we not been run off of the top of YouTube by now by the FCC?
Actually, that was going to be my question. How are we? Yeah, but actually, at episode 10 is Smoking Bed Bugs, episode 495, with Dr. Jason Persoff. And this was a very, very interesting episode that actually was recorded on July 20th of 2015. Now, Dr. Persoff is an associate professor of internal medicine at the University of Colorado Hospital. And he was also the assistant director of emergency preparedness at the University of Colorado's medical campus. But this also happens to be the first appearance by our very own Troy Kimmel on the WeatherBrains panel on episode 495. Now, Dr. Persoff gives a very candid recount to provide the medical assistance that he provided in Joplin in the aftermath of the EF5 tornado on May 22nd of 2011. This is actually the first tornado in the U.S. to cause over 100 fatalities since June 8th of 1953 in Flint, Michigan. One of the interesting things, and this doesn't get talked about a whole lot, and that is at some point in the show, there was an emphasis placed on the necessity for most meteorologists to take the ICS 100 and the ICS 200 courses through the FEMA Emergency Management Institute. So this episode has a lot of information in it, and it's definitely worth a listen if you've never listened to this episode. So for anyone on the panel, any memories of episode 495, Smoking Bed Bugs?
You're going to point out a lot of emotional episodes tonight. I mean, this is one of those.
Absolutely. I remember that, Bill and Jeremy, so much. I just remember his recount of account of that event.
You just never know when you go into a show what's going to happen, and that's a prime example of it right there. You think you're going to do one thing and then a whole nother thing happens. It truly is amazing sometimes.
Indeed, it was. And I've heard Dr. Persoff speak, and he is definitely a great speaker. And I still get chill bumps when I go back and listen to that episode, listen to his retelling of that. Mm-hmm. So at episode number 9 is episode 350, Particularly Dangerous Situation with Brian Norcross. Now, this premise of this episode was when Brian was working with the Weather Channel, and the main topic was the Weather Channel's decision to begin naming winter storms beginning in the 2012-2013 winter season. Some other things that were discussed was the use of Toricon, and why not just use STP, And there was even a part when Nate was doing the email segment talking about the SPC at that point, implementing an experimental program to add additional categories to category severe weather outlooks. So this is actually an interesting episode going back to October 8th of 2012. So any comments or anything regarding WeatherBrains episode 350?
Yeah, I was surprised Brian ever came back after that show. He took such abuse that night.
Yeah,
but they still did.
Like
they still continue to name them. That's for sure. Yeah, he did, and Brian's a good friend.
And the part of it was just amazing that now it's been Weather Channel's been naming winter storms now for almost 9 years, which is kind of hard to fathom.
Yeah.
So
insane is what I was thinking, but that's okay. Hard to fathom works.
Aubrey said it, not me. Anyway,
and it's made it into the parlance, like the WeatherWise magazines, the almanac issue. I was noticing, each winter storm they actually, that they recorded in there, they mentioned the name that the Weather Channel gave it.
Yeah.
At number 8, violent tornado in Moore, Oklahoma, episode 382. This was recorded just literally hours after the EF5 tornado struck Moore on May 20th of 2013. As of today, now this is being recorded on Monday, May 17th, 2021. This is still the last EF5 tornado to date in the United States, 2,919 days. Actually, what's interesting, I went back and looked, the time span from May 3rd, 1999, the Bridge Creek Moore F5, to the May 4th, 2007 Greensburg, Kansas EF5 was 2,921 days. So we're almost actually to that point as well. Bill, you had an interesting comment during the episode saying social media is the new outdoor warning system. So this is now, we're approaching the 8-year anniversary of the EF5 that went through Moore on May 20th of 2013. Any comments or anything like that regarding WeatherBrains episode 382?
Wow, another emotional day just because of the loss of the children.
Yeah.
That day. That really was a hard show.
Number 7, live from NWA 2019, episode 712. Now,
yeah, this is Sharpie Gate, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Now, I'm gonna preface this. You do not have to reach for your phones to call for your lawyers. We're not going down that road. But what I want to do, because it's look, I get it. It could be very, very easy to focus on the negative here, and I think that's been done. But what I want to actually do tonight is celebrate. And what that is celebrate the Weather Enterprise coming together in the days afterwards. I think a lot of you probably saw it, that hashtag, I stand with NWS Birmingham. I will fully admit, I turned off social media for probably a good 2 or 3 days after everything that went down. When I came back and I started seeing this, it's like, you know what? My faith has been restored big time in just that amount of time, just seeing this. And for me, and like, I get it. I'm not on television. Hey, this face was born perfect for radio. So, hey, I'm not doing any of that.
Hey, so was mine. That didn't stop him. So,
but this to me was one of, at least in my portion of my career where I'm at, a very, very, very proud moment to be part of this Weather Enterprise. So, any questions or comments on episode 712?
Well, there was a palpable fear that Monday night that we recorded this show. I mean, it suddenly felt like, you didn't know what you could say or do, or, who would come and attack you. And it was a very vulnerable feeling.
I got to give a shout out to Alan Seals, who, the president of the NWA that year was Paul Schlatter, a Weather Service employee. Alan was in between TV jobs at the moment, had made a deal and was heading in a direction, but was technically sort of unemployed at the moment. And having been a past president of the NWA, was able to step in and speak on behalf, I think, of the association in a way that was fantastic. and could tell you what he thought and was happy to tell you and anybody. And there where we had national media there. I think at least a couple of networks showed up and, wanting to get video and all that other stuff and wanting to talk to people. And since it was an NWA meeting that Jacobs was speaking at about all of that, just on a regularly scheduled talk that was anything but regular, having somebody who could speak on behalf really of the weather enterprise and speak freely, I thought was really key in that moment.
And hats off to James too, because he assembled, a bunch of folks to sit on the front row and be there, to actively support Neil and Louie and everyone who spoke that day. And I appreciated him for doing that.
All right, to segue into the next one, episode number 6. Talking Snow Forecasting Bust, episode 419. Ooh. If I'm dredging up bad memories for all of you, I'm really, really sorry. I will totally understand if you never talk to me ever again. So I have to
when do we get to the fun shows?
We're getting there. We're getting there. We're getting there. Yeah, February 3rd, 2014. Obviously, after the event, the snow and ice event in the Southeast United States in January 2014. Bill, as you said during the episode, my worst day in weather. I don't know. Like I said, I live in Lincoln, Nebraska. I was not part of this event, so I'm going to segue to potentially some of you folks. Talk to me a little bit, if you want to, about what happened in relation to WeatherBrains episode 419.
I was shocked at how fast people attacked James, despite the incredible equity he's built over decades. And, you began to see these comments on social media that just made you angry, and the way he diffused that was so spectacular, because he walked on television the minute he got to the TV station after walking through snow for a mile, because his car became stranded. And, he just apologized. And, it just instantly, it was like blowing all the clouds away. It was like, okay, that's, what you have to do in that situation is just take responsibility, and people will forgive you and forget it. We don't even think about that part of it anymore, the missed forecast part. We just think about the people coming together in the humanitarian crisis that, involved that night.
And I have a little note there on the PowerPoint. Again, these are just, from my notes, my endless notes that I was taking during all of this. 7 years later, how are we at forecasting impacts at this point?
I think we're getting better, but it's still a struggle, I think.
We've said it on this program many times before that wintry weather, the margins for error with wintry weather are so small that things that are, on a 70-degree day, 3/100ths of an inch of precipitation is nothing. It will barely wet the pavement. But that same amount of moisture on a 20-degree day at the wrong time can turn your interstates into skating rinks.
Especially when the ground was warm and melted the initial snow layer.
Or actually, in our case,
16 degrees froze.
The ground was cold here when we had that event, and the tires running over was just warm enough to melt it and then refreeze it on top of that cold ground. And turn. I mean, a couple of different ways to get there, but wintry weather is and I think there's something psychological about it here in the South and Southeast. It'll be interesting, I think, to see in future years, now that students, we've gotten accustomed to asynchronous learning and remote learning and all this other stuff, to see how that changes, the mentality. Because for most of us growing up, snow day was a fun day. Yeah. Now, if it snows and everything just goes on like normal, kids remote learn from home, and parents can have a remote work day or something like that. Does that change the magic at all? Does that change the calculus?
So COVID ruined snow days. I guess that'll be the bottom line.
All right,
Number
next.
5.
Number 5. We'll move along here. Number 5. Well, it's the aptly named URL Not Found, episode 404 with Mike Morgan. Now, Bill, I'm just going to segue to you on this one. I watched this episode. I rewatched it actually earlier this morning. All I could say is that Mike was definitely needed after 5 months of, from when, Moore and El Reno occurred, it sounded like this was a guy that just needed to say something. And that's exactly what he was doing. Thoughts, comments on 404?
Mike spoke from his heart that night and looked like an NXS video, the way he had those cards,
Remember that the index cards was my takeaway from that.
But, and he wasn't real happy after the show. He called me back the next morning and said, do not show that show. And I said, there's no one showing it. It's live, Mike, it's already been released into the wild. But, I respect him for coming on and, saying what he said. And I still think to this day, it's one of the most real episodes we've ever had. We got a lot of pushback from big names in the Weather Enterprise that wrote us the next morning and said, you shouldn't have let him do that. And, we just, it felt like a night where he needed to have the floor. And I thought it worked out,
All right. Number 4, recent 797, the April 27th, 2011 anniversary. Now, for me, I know you guys just did this, and I know how tremendously difficult that particular episode was. So for me, trying to go back and watch this, and let me pivot here, this was difficult for me to watch. And again, I live in Nebraska. I've been living here now for 15 years. I remember this event, obviously. And this, I will admit, this one was fully difficult for me to view. I had a quick thought. And again, this is just from my notes. I'm just saying here that there will be moments in life where I'm not in control. With these moments come experiences, lessons, heartbreak, and pain. I remind myself that even in the darkest of hours, I've learned that life is full of beauty and possibility. Embrace each moment for these moments in time that make us who we are. And we must remember after every storm comes a clear sky. I don't know if you want to say anything about this or not. It was beautifully done. That's what I can say.
That was that episode of your favorite show that just rips your heart out, steps on it.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about raw and real and people with stories to tell. And I don't think we've even scratched the surface.
Right.
You took the words out of my mouth, Nate. We didn't even scratch the surface. A man went back after the April 3rd, 1974 outbreak in Alabama, and he went and recorded the memories of literally hundreds of survivors, and he published this book. It's about this thick, and it's just their raw, unadulterated accounts of what they went through that day. And we didn't even come close. James is in the process of getting a book out there with all those stories, and it'll be a lot like that book. And that book is a treasure to me because it makes me go. It's always made me go back and remember the people and their anguish and their pain. Beyond just the process of forecasting and warning. That's where the rubber meets the road with those real people's lives.
Mm-hmm. As the newbie here, just thank you for putting that episode up there. I have never been that. I'm not a person who emotes like that in public. I'm very, very private being a broadcaster, and I'm just extremely private. So that was the most I've actually emoted about that whole scenario. And really looked back, and it was very therapeutic for me. And I was overwhelmed by how many people wrote to the WeatherBrains social media and to the Tornado Talk social media, and even wrote me emails about it. And so I think it had an impact, and will continue to do so for years to come as people go back and watch that episode, and just how the impacts on everybody in the weather enterprise. I don't think people realize how it impacted us.
And we're going to say bye to Aaron because he's got to go. We thank you so much, Aaron, for being part of the show tonight.
Sure.
Sorry we've gone on so long, but we'll have you back real soon. Thank you to you and John both.
Yeah, appreciate it. And we'll take you up on that offer to run through a case sometime.
All right, I'll get with you this week and we'll set a date. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right. Take care.
Thanks for being here, guys. And if you get a chance, go back and read the post that Jen did, because Chris Darden shared an amazing several-page story of his experience as the MIC in Huntsville, and it'll continue to rip your heart out if you're brave enough to read it, because it's real. And bye, John, by the way.
So I fully realize the last few episodes have been probably extremely heart-wrenching to recall.
And I gotta say something, Jeremy, because our friend Johnny Parker gets together every few months or so with a few meteorologists, and I'm lucky to get to be a part of that. And I got to break the news to him that he was the number 4 top episode of the YouTube era. So I want to apologize to Johnny if he's sitting at home right now in Mississippi going, what in the heck was Murray talking about? I wasn't number 4. Johnny, I was wrong. You were number 3.
That is correct. He is number 3. And it actually, the episode name is Span's Pants Are Drooping. But yes, the inspiring story of Johnny Parker. I have not had the pleasure of meeting Johnny. I have been friends with him on Facebook for a couple years now. Such an exceptional human being. I believe, Bill, I believe Johnny was, 18 when the interview was done in January 2013? Or
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got to meet him because of Jen Watson. She wanted him to meet Laura Myers. And so when you talk about Johnny, you can't just talk about Johnny. You have to talk about his whole family, because his mother, Patty, his father, his sister, they're a unit. And you got the quote of all time right there, Jeremy, where you say you can't measure heart and determination, because he went on to Mississippi State, even though he has cerebral palsy and, has a difficult time speaking. But his mind is, brilliant. He graduated with, great grades, and is an amazing person. And so he always lifts me up when I'm around him.
And just to add on to that, should say is, reading his social media posts and everything. Yeah, he is brilliant. I mean, everything that he articulates, the information he puts out, unbelievable. But yeah, as I put in there, from someone also that's gone through some different trials and tribulations, you cannot measure heart and determination. And if you need a heartwarming story, please go back and listen to 366. It is one that will definitely melt your heart. So, well, we are to the top 2, and I think this was a difficult decision to figure out which one went 1 and which one went 2. But at number 2, I believe, is one of the most important episodes you've ever done. It's an interesting show title. It's Helen Hunt and James Spann Had a Baby. It's episode 682. 682 was the Women in Science and Meteorology special. This, as I say there in some notes, this was an easy choice. One of the most important episodes, and I wrote in there a strong group of women professionals that I have a tremendous amount of respect for in this field. Great show, great episode. Everything, the topics was probably, like I said, one of the best ones that you guys have ever produced. Some feedback, anything recall from episode 682?
I was very glad to see the amount of positive response that came to that show. And I'm glad you put it right here, Jim.
Yeah, it's well deserving, and you can't see it, but over in the corner, my wife, who had no idea this list even existed up until today, she's giving me a big thumbs up. So that's
There you go. You got some points there, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to say I was on the the Stormfront Freaks podcast last Thursday night, and I'm humiliated to say that they paired me up against the director of the Twister Museum from Oklahoma in a game of Twister trivia, and I only got one question right.
Oh, so they had Linda Wade on?
Yeah, and
Linda Wade.
she was precious, and she just whooped my butt. Of course, now she was sitting in the museum and she had all the stuff around her, and to be honest, they gave her easy questions. I only got one question the entire show.
Sure, they gave her easy questions.
And the answer was Helen Hunt. So I can identify with that title.
All right, the number one episode of the YouTube era, in my opinion, if that counts for anything, is the Mega Michael Special, episode 665. October 15, 2018. This has the distinction of I believe, the largest panel of guests you've ever had. 11 guests in total over a runtime of 3 hours and 24 minutes. Again, I know we're getting kind of late here, but incredible. The way that show was put together was, especially using Google Hangouts, incredibly done, well done. For 3 hours and 24 minutes, for me at least, it's an easy sit through and watch. I mean, the information is just so riveting and enthralling and everything. Anything that you want to say about 665?
Well, it was not easy getting all those people, on the show, and we had a lot of technical difficulties, but each one of them had a critical say in that storm, and that storm hit me hard because we were forecasting it for the 4 or 5 days that it ran up to the Gulf Coast, but it just never would seem to stop strengthening all the way right up to landfall. And the really scary thing was Brett Adair, who was on the show that night. We were watching his live stream, and I didn't think we were going to be talking to Brett afterwards because the water had, swallowed his truck, and he just was so fortunate, that he went to the right place and found a window that was open and got into a house and was safe. He could have been dead. And so, that was a very emotional show too for me, because we had lived it, forecasting it, knowing those people that had not left Mexico Beach were in big trouble.
Well, that is the top 10 episodes of WeatherBrains so far in the YouTube era. Again, my heartfelt thanks to everyone, all the past individuals that you've had on the show and the panelists every single week. The amount of effort that all of you put in is greatly, greatly appreciated. I mean, that's all I can say and everything. So with that being said, I know it's getting late, but thank you so much. This is Jeremy, out.
Jeremy, thank you. That was a magnificent job. And it really means a lot to us. And I know Nate got so excited as soon as you sent the email, and because like, this is really, really well done. So we appreciate it. So I know we are here late. We almost made it back to James last week. We might make it back to him tonight. So I guess we'll go around the table here and talk about the weather all over the country. Jen, what you got going on in Ohio? You mentioned a little bit at the beginning of the show.
Yeah, it looks like a little bit of rain here tomorrow and maybe a storm or two, but then the ridge takes over and it's just going to be dry and warm, I think, by Thursday, Friday into the weekend. And I'm fine with that. I'm ready for the switch, and because it's still been fairly chilly over the past couple of weeks, but I'm ready for the switch and just hanging out and doing my thing. So it's quiet up here.
Well, that's outstanding. And now Nate's gone. Nate, you can't go till I show you one thing. Can you identify what this is, Nate?
The lemon pie from, not sure from where, but
from Lexington, North Carolina.
Oh,
I'm
nice.
driving down the interstate tonight, and I look over to the right, and there's a sign that says Lexington, and I thought Nate has told me there's good barbecue there, and
It's some of the best in the state and maybe the world.
So I cut across 3 lanes of I-185 or whatever that is.
Yep.
Shot off the exit, hit the Yelp, and it sent me to something called Lexington Barbecue, and a spectacular meal, Nate. So
dude, that's like that. You stumbled into heaven.
I sure did, and I
into
knew
heaven.
The parking lot was full, and it's not a small parking lot.
No, it's not. And, right off the interstate there, you get yourself a good meal there. Well, good.
And I do as the Romans do. I said, what's the number one order? It was chopped pork, French fries, hush puppies, and slaw, and some unsweet tea, and you could not beat it.
I got to tell you, next time, ask for a little outside brown mixed into your barbecue.
I almost did that. Flavor. Yep, I like that.
Yeah, but that's a good. I mean, that's a very
no sauce,
good.
Though, no, no sauce.
There's a little dip. You have to ask for the dip separate, but you don't need it. I mean, if the meat's cooked well, you don't need the sauce.
You're right.
But you have a little dip on it. One of the things I like about the slaw in the Lexington / Western North Carolina tradition is that it's not mayo based. It's chopped cabbage, and it's in this tomato vinegar dip, they call it. I don't like mayo, and I don't like slaw that's based in mayo, but I'll eat the stuff, and that's good stuff. And there's something about, sorry to take this into barbecue brains, but there's something about that hot barbecue with that cold slaw, but they're sort of united with that tomatoey vinegar tang. And then you bite into that, and the textures and the cold and the hot. Oh, if I'd have known you were going to be in my state, I'd have met you. I'd have gone out there and met you.
Well, I'm pretty close. I'm in Greensboro, so I'm watching the big planes land over here at the Greensboro Airport. It's IFR in room 220 here tonight with all the smoke. It looks like.
Well, if you're lucky tomorrow before you leave, you may see the plane that is Air Force One when the president's on board doing touch and goes. They use that airstrip for practice for the pilots for Air Force One.
Oh my goodness, that would be quite an honor. So that's pretty awesome. Anything to add, Nate?
Nope, I got to run. The only foghorn you'll give me is the foghorn for the Carolina Hurricanes, one of our weather-themed hockey teams winning their first playoff game against the Nashville Predators tonight, 5-2 here in Greater Raleigh, North Carolina. So the foghorn actually works for a pick of the week for that one because.
Well, thanks for being here, Nate. We appreciate it.
Y'all take care. Thanks again, Jeremy.
Troy, we'll kind of combine your pick of the week with your weather roundup.
Yeah, my pick of the week has to go to Jeremy for the good work done with the top 10. I got to tell you, I was going to make that my pick of the week, but Jeremy, good job as usual, man. Good job.
You're too kind.
And my pick of the week is let's go and play the QPF game and go look at the latest 1 to 7 day QPF. Look in the middle of the heaviest rainfall, and welcome to Austin, Texas.
So are you a little excited, Troy? I mean, or are you a little worried? Because
I'm more worried than I am excited. I could deal without this at this point. This has been a strange spring and winter, and it really has been. It just seems like we've had a lot of hail events down here, and now we're getting into this rain event where they're saying 5 to 10 inches of rain. And I'm ready for summer, but I don't know if y'all seen it or not, but the European weeklies came out a little earlier today, or maybe yesterday. And, they're showing over parts of Texas that even into June and July, that we may be a little wetter and cooler than average in parts of Texas. That trend may be continuing if you look at it, European weeklies. And I find that interesting.
Well, I guess that's a good thing. Keep the 100-degree heat and the drought at bay maybe for a little while. That'll be good. Well, thank you for being here tonight, Troy, from your palatial Homewood Suites suite there. and unfortunately, no real news out of Hilton on what's going to happen for the future. So,
I made the decision this week not to make anyone mad, but then it would be the first time in my life I've ever done that. But I've made the decision this week. I'm going to basically go places without mask. So I'm kind of going maskless this week, and I'm sneaking through the stairwells of the Hilton, by the way, Bill. I don't go down the hallway. I got access to my truck down the stairwell. So I'm kind of going without masks this week.
Well, it's interesting because they did come out this afternoon and say that, that the forward-facing employees still have to wear their masks. There's no question. But employees that are vaccinated in the back of the house are allowed not to. So that was one step. And I'm vaccinated, but I'm still wearing mine. I walked in a Flying J today, and I think everybody in the store wanted to tell me to take a flying leap because I was the only person there with a mask on.
It's also interesting too, guys, that I have to work the EOC at UTPD for Friday and Saturday with the graduation here. In the middle, we may be on an arc when that's happening, by the way. And so I got my 3 months period since I had COVID, and then 3 months since I had my shots. And I'm actually testing. They want us to test once a week again. And so I'm actually testing once a week. Got my negative COVID test a little earlier today. So that was good.
Good. Well, with the new Indian variant running around, there's no telling, what might be happening, especially with vaccinated people maybe carrying it asymptomatically. Bruce Jones, sorry for the long show tonight. Don't want you to fall asleep on me over there. You always honor us with an awesome pick. What you got for us?
That's okay. The India Meteorological Department has now downgraded the cyclone Tauktae, I guess is the name of it. It was a severe cyclonic storm. I'm sorry, it was extremely severe. It's been downgraded to very severe and is expected to weaken to severe. So those are their categories: extremely severe, very severe, and severe. And it's expected to weaken into a severe cyclonic storm here in the next several hours. That's the latest.
None of those sound good.
No.
No, and I had my eye set on an Indian restaurant over here near the airport tonight, and Nate's gone now. But my recollection of Nate and his former episodes of Barbecue Brains fortunately steered me off the interstate, or I would have missed that opportunity. Jen, we're keeping you up too late.
I know. I'm turning very pumpkin-y right now.
You got an
my pick of the
orange
week.
glow about you.
You see the orange glow? It's like, storm report sign starting to take over my brain here. No, Google Earth is my pick of the week. I have never immersed myself more into Google Earth than when writing these summaries. Yeah. And they're really amazing to do the tracks and overlays and import KML files and be able to look up locations and then even going back in time to see doing satellite overlays and all that. So Google Earth is a really neat tool. If you've never played with it, I really highly recommend it. Especially if you're a map geek like us, and we're looking at damage and satellite and all that stuff. So it's a cool tool. So that's my pick of the week.
Yeah, I have to give a shout out to the teachers at Liberty Park Middle School, part of the Vestavia system in Birmingham. They also do a launch of a weather balloon. Yeah. And I got to record their training this year. They launched that on Friday, or Thursday or Friday. And, you can kind of predict where it's going to go. There are models that take the GFS data and show you the trajectory of the balloon. And it went almost exactly where the model said. And when it landed, they sent me a coordinate, and that's what I used, Jen. I pulled up Google Earth, and I said, it's probably lying just beyond that tree line on the power line cut. And sure enough, it was right there when they went to find it. They found it on the first try. So
that's cool.
Thank you to Google Earth. Mm-hmm. And thank you for all the cool stuff you do, Jen. Jeremy.
Thank you.
Yeah,
hats off to you, sir.
Thank you. No, thank you for everything. You made this easy to do. Real quick, Troy, Fannett, Texas, there in Jefferson County, 16 inches of rain in the last 24 hours. This is starting to be reminiscent of 2015 up here. We had a lot of flooding up here in Lincoln, and it's starting to kind of get that vibe, unfortunately. Pick of the week, real quick, so we can get you folks out of here. Let's see. All right. It is the striated shelf cloud. near Hobson, Montana, back on June 27th of 2019. We'll probably have a link to this to my Facebook page, so you can go look at that. One of my favorite photos from the last couple of years. So yeah, if you want to go follow me on follow the photography, go Facebook JRB Storm Photography or on Twitter at JRB Storm. But other than that, thank you again so much for having me on tonight, and let me flap my jaws.
Well, we've enjoyed it immensely, and that just is an unreal picture.
Yeah,
I mean, you
beautiful.
take some beautiful ones. But I guess, Troy, we'd entertain a motion to adjourn since we're pretty late here.
I'd like to make a
WeatherBrains.
motion that we adjourn.
I'm sure
I will
that's a
second
unanimous.
that.
That's a
I'm ready.
unanimous vote.
I gotta go to bed.
WeatherBrains is the weekly newscast.
Unanimous.
It's all about weather, and we do this fun and frivolity every Monday night. And I have loved doing it for all these years. I think what James said earlier is really true. We never intended that anybody would ever listen to it, and tonight, we would be doing it even if no one was. But because we love it so much. But we thank each and every one of you for listening and watching over the years, and everyone who stayed up late tonight. But until next week, when I can't remember who the guest will be, but it'll be a great one. I promise you that. I am guest booking officer Bill Murray. It's my honor to do that every week. And until I talk to you next week, keep an eye to the sky because you'll always have something fun to look at. Awesome show, guys. Thank you.
Enjoyed it, everybody. Thanks, Jerry.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, bye, everybody.
I was hoping I could actually catch the end of the show here. That thing was running so long. We just got off the 10 o'clock news here, but I really get the idea. I need to go listen to this show. It sounds like a lot of fun. I could see it in the monitor in the Studio A back there, some of the countdown stuff, the top 10 episodes of the YouTube era. So thanks to Jeremy for putting all that together. And a great topic tonight. We're always trying to make the tornado warning process better, always. And the more we can communicate and talk and think things out, the better off we are. And there's some really smart people on the show tonight. So that was a lot of fun. Yeah, we started this again back in 2006, and I really didn't plan on people listening to this. We just, let me rephrase that. I needed a creative outlet. If you ever note what we do, it's very structured. You go in the studio and you got 3 minutes here and 2 minutes here and a minute and a half here. And, on the radio, you got 20 seconds here. And it's just all day is what you've got. And of course, back in 2006, Twitter didn't exist, and you had MySpace and Facebook, but it wasn't a big deal back then. So it was just a way of giving us a creative outlet. So we could talk weather and not have to worry about some producer screaming in our ear, your time's up. And David Black was a really a great host. In fact, I think in the soundboard here, I've got the, put my ears on here. This was the first one. I personally think we have way too many warnings. Severe thunderstorm warnings are a dime a dozen, and it's getting to be that way with tornado warning.
Welcome to WeatherBrains, the podcast about weather by weather fans. I'm David Black with the Weather Company from Birmingham, Alabama, welcoming you to our first program. With me tonight, James Spain.
What's interesting about that, and by the way, that was January 31st of 2006, the first show. And I'm still griping about the same thing, too many warnings. And notice David said it was produced by the Weather Company. Those in the weather business, the Weather Company is like IBM. That's a big player in the weather enterprise. We sold the name of that business to them, and we changed we got a $9 domain name, the Weather Factory, because we don't care what we call it. But anyway, it's been a fun ride. 800 shows. Who'd have thunk it? We've got 800 more to go. We're just getting started here. So thank you guys for watching and listening. We'll be back next Monday night at 8 o'clock Central, 9 o'clock Eastern. Y'all have a great